A girl was sold to marry the village's poorest man. He was secretly a billionaire. Adhama's father owed money he couldn't pay, so he traded his daughter like a coin to settle his debt. The groom was covered in dirt, never spoke, and everyone thought he was just another broke farmer. But on their wedding night, something strange happened. Instead of taking what he bought, he slept on the floor. When she got sick, he stayed awake all night making medicine from forest herbs. When village women mocked her, he defended her with words so powerful the whole town went silent. Then one day, a man in an expensive suit drove into their poor village shouting Dr. Medivh, calling her dirt-covered husband one of the richest men in the country. The man everyone pitied was hiding a fortune bigger than anyone could imagine. But why was a billionaire pretending to be poor? Why did he choose a clay house over mansions? And why did he let a village girl discover his heart before his wealth? Stay with us to witness the moment when a forced marriage became real love. You'll learn why he gave up everything to find someone who would choose him without knowing his money. You'll see how the girl sold like property became the woman who transformed an entire village. Because this isn't just about hidden wealth, it's about a love so pure it had to be tested by poverty first. The truth waiting in this story will change how you see what real riches actually mean. The daydreams died. The sun seemed to mock Adhama's pain on her wedding day, burning high and merciless as curious onlookers gathered at the village entrance. Her father, Bacheri, stood with arms crossed, watching from a distance, not out of shame for what he was doing, but fear that someone might dare to protest. To him, Adama wasn't a life full of dreams. She was merely a coin to wipe away his stained honor. There were no drums, no songs, no laughter. The air stood heavy, as if even the birds had chosen to respect the silent mourning of that forced union. The cake was nothing more than dry cornbread placed on a woven mat. Crooked candles barely stood upright beside a gourd filled with well water meant to bless the union. Adhama wore a borrowed dress, stained at the hem, and a veil so thin it looked more like a cloth to wipe sweat. Her eyes looked hollow, like a field scorched after drought. Each step toward the man her father had chosen felt like burying a piece of her heart. Medivh, the groom, stood motionless. He didn't adjust his worn shirt or scratch his dirt-covered face. He just stared at the ground, as if counting ants, as if none of this had anything to do with him. The people began to whisper, "Those who marry without joy live without light." An older woman murmured, "That girl will wither like a flower in the ashes." When the village chief raised a dry branch to seal the union, Adhama felt her body tremble. Her legs gave out for a moment, but she took a deep breath, remembering her mother's face. The few who had come out of obligation clapped their hands coldly, without rhythm, without soul. Each clap felt like a slap to Adama's face, a reminder that no one there saw her worth. After the ceremony, there was no music, only silence spreading like dust in their shoes. Neighbors returned to their homes carrying empty pots, murmuring, "When the poor marry, not even God sings." Adhama left with her head down, holding up her dress so she wouldn't trip on stones. Behind her, Medivh walked slowly, dragging his feet, carrying a sack of corn like it was just another burden. There was no hand-holding, no glance exchanged. They looked like two strangers heading toward the same sentence. As she passed through the gate of her father's house, Adhama looked back and saw her mother standing still, holding her chest with both hands, as if trying to keep her heart from falling to the ground. In that moment, Adhama understood this marriage wasn't the beginning of a shared life. It was the start of a solitary journey, a path of mud she'd have to walk with her own tears. The House of Silence. The walk to Medeva's house felt endless, not because of distance, but because time seemed to drag, stretching each minute like torture. When they arrived under the high moon, it illuminated nothing but cold shadows, dancing like ancient ghosts. The house was made of clay, with cracks so deep they looked like open wounds. A single wooden door hung from one hinge, and a small window was covered with old cloth. Inside, darkness felt like a hole in the world. The strong smell of corn, old smoke, and damp earth filled Adhama's nose. The floor was hard-packed dirt, cold as stone. In the corner lay a mattress so thin it looked like cloth laid over hard ground, topped with a torn blanket stained with stories of sleepless nights. Medeva entered first, dropped his sack of corn, and stood silently staring at the ground. Adama remained in the doorway, hugging her own arms, trying to hold together a body trembling more from fear than cold. Then he turned slowly, unhurried, and looked at her briefly, a quick glance like accidentally catching a stranger's eyes on the street. When he spoke, his voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "You don't owe me anything." Adhama blinked, confused. She had expected rough touch, commanding voice, a body that would take hers by force, just as so many village women had whispered about in kitchens. But hearing those words, something inside her broke. The fear that had felt as large as a mountain began crumbling into dust. Medeva walked to the far corner, laid out a small mat, and lay down facing the wall. His breathing was heavy but not violent. There was no desire, no rush, no malice, only pained silence carrying stories Adhama wasn't ready to understand. She slowly approached the mattress and sat carefully, eyes on her hands. Her body still trembled, but her heart beat in a different rhythm now, confused, trying to make sense of what this man truly was. The night was long. Wind slipped through wall cracks, whistling sadly. Adhama pulled the blanket tighter, but sleep never came. Every outside sound startled her, snapping branches, creaking wood. But Medeva didn't move, didn't invade her space, didn't cross the invisible line dividing them. In the middle of the night, she heard a different sound, a deep sigh like someone holding back tears too long. She turned slowly and saw Medeva trembling, covered to his head. For a moment she thought about asking if he needed anything, but bit her lip and stayed quiet. Maybe this man also carried pain no one could see, pain as deep as the cracks in the walls. The language of gestures. When the rooster crowed, announcing a new day, Adhama was still awake, face swollen from holding back tears. Medeva rose before sunrise, rolled up his mat, put on his worn shirt, and left without a word. Each morning became routine. He would leave with his hoe slung over his shoulder, while Adhama swept the floor, organized the few utensils, and tidied the yard. The silence was so deep that the broom's sound felt like thunder. At first, Adhama didn't have courage to prepare anything for him. She feared rejection, humiliation, or worse, being ignored. But one afternoon, when the sky turned clay-colored and wind carried the scent of rain, she decided to make thin porridge from a handful of flour stored in a cracked pot. The porridge was nearly water, but it was her first offering. She placed it on a dented metal plate with a cup of fresh water on the crooked table. When Medeva returned, his face and hands were so caked with dirt, he looked like he'd emerged from underground. He entered slowly, looked at the plate, then at her sitting in the corner twisting a scarf in her hands. Without saying a word, he sat down and ate. Each spoonful was slow, as if he were meditating on every grain. When he finished, he looked up and nodded silently, a gesture that felt like a whispered, "Thank you," in the dark. From that day forward, it became routine. She cooked small portions, saltless rice, thin cassava soup, a handful of beans. He always ate slowly, thanked her with a glance or subtle nod, then stepped outside to sit on a stone and stare at the horizon until nightfall. The villagers, hungry for gossip, didn't take long to invent stories. One woman, with a tongue sharper than a butcher's knife, spread rumors that Adhama lived like a prisoner, that her husband was mute and dumb, that she went hungry and cried every night. One afternoon, while gathering firewood, Adhama heard two women laughing. She thinks she married, but she married loneliness. She married silence. Those words pierced her like thorns. For a moment, she wished she could vanish, turn to dust, evaporate in the heat. But instead, she kept collecting wood, eyes fixed on the ground, hands steady, heart bleeding in silence. When she returned home, she found Medeva sitting on the floor cleaning his hoe, face burned by sun, neck dusty, eyes downcast. For the first time, they ate together in shared silence that shifted something between one spoonful and the next. Their eyes met, full of questions neither dared ask. In the following days, Adhama began observing more. She noticed how Medeva left before the first rooster's crow, how his hands bled from cracks that never healed, how silence grew heavier at each day's end. At night, she heard his dragging steps, the sound of him washing his feet outside, his tired sigh before lying on the mat. It was then, in their daily rhythm, that Adhama began understanding. Medeva's greatest pain wasn't his silence. It was carrying an entire world inside his chest with no one to share it with. The night everything changed. Time in the village isn't measured by clocks. Each day is counted by roosters' crow, hoes striking earth, and fires lit at dusk. Between one silence and another, Adhama and Medeva wove a quiet routine. She prepared food and cleaned house. He left early and returned tired, always silent. Everything changed on a cold night, when wind blew harder than usual. Adhama awoke with her body heavy, fever burning inside her like fire in every bone. She tried to rise, but her legs gave out. She collapsed onto the dirt floor, breath short, eyes spinning, the world swirling like a dust storm. Medeva, sleeping in his corner, heard the fall. He jumped up, rare for him, and rushed to her. For the first time, his silence turned to urgency. He picked her up gently, as if cradling a wounded bird. Her skin burned. Her dry lips begged for water. He laid her on the thin mattress, tucked the blanket around her with trembling hands, and ran into the brush without a word. Minutes later, he returned with green leaves, roots, herbs pressed tight against his chest. He heated water, chopped leaves with a dull knife, mixed everything in a gourd. The bitter smell filled the house. Carefully, he moistened her lips, one drop at a time, afraid of drowning her. All the while, he wiped sweat from her brow with an old cloth. That night, Medeva didn't leave her side. He sat beside her, holding her hand, watching every movement, every breath. Sometimes he murmured words she couldn't understand, prayers maybe, old confessions, or quiet talks with a god only he knew. When Adhama trembled, he pulled the blanket to her neck. When she coughed, he leaned in, caressed her hair, gripped her hand tightly as if to say, "I'm here." The fire died down, but Medeva didn't sleep. At dawn, when the rooster sang its first call, Adhama opened her eyes, weak but alive. She saw Medeva sitting beside her, red-eyed with dark circles. She tried to speak, but her voice came as a whisper. Why do you treat me kindly when I was thrown at your door like a burden?" Medeva lowered his head, took a deep breath. For a moment it seemed he might answer, but instead he only squeezed her hand tighter. With his thumb, he wiped away a tear rolling down her cheek, a simple gesture so full of truth that no words could match it. In that instant, Something broke inside Adama. The old fear, resentment, and shame turned to dust. For the first time, she truly saw the man behind the silence. He wasn't a monster or brute or soulless mute. He was a man carrying weight no one else could see. Someone who knew how to care in silence, love without demanding, protect without boasting. The discovery. Weeks passed like a silent river. Little by little, Adhama began walking through the house like someone who belonged there. Her hands touched utensils with newfound care, as if blessing each object with tenderness. One afternoon, while tidying, Adama decided to clean a corner she'd never touched. Behind a pile of old sacks, she found a small wooden chest. The lock was broken. It looked forgotten long ago. Her heart began racing, a mix of curiosity and fear, a thirst to understand who this man really was. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside, papers, old letters, black and white photographs with torn edges, some stained beyond time's forgiveness. There was also a simple gold ring with initials M.A. engraved inside. The letters, written in firm handwriting, spoke of business, farms, distant bank accounts, commercial partnerships. There were signed contracts, invitations to meetings in big cities, and photos of Medivh wearing fine suits, standing beside important men. In one photo, Medivh was smiling, something she'd never seen before. Adhama sat on the floor, papers spread around her, sunlight streaming through a wall crack, lighting every piece of that hidden life. Questions came in waves. Who is this man? What is he doing here? Why hide all this? For a moment she wanted to run to the village and tell everyone, but the thought died before forming completely. Something deep inside told her the secret wasn't a weapon. It was a wound Medivh protected, like someone guarding a scar that still hurt. She gathered the papers, closed the chest gently, and placed it back in the dark corner. She sat there holding the ring tightly, the cold metal burning her skin, imagining the life Medivh had left behind. Lit ballrooms, fine clothes, fake laughter, promises of power, all traded for a clay house, thin mattress, and the company of a woman who came into his life like a sentence. When Medivh came home that night, he found a different Adhama. Her eyes were deeper, glowing like someone carrying thunder inside. She didn't ask anything or show what she'd seen. She simply set food on the table and sat watching his every move with new attention. Adhama had the ring in her dress pocket, like a talisman. That day, stirring porridge, she thought about women who mocked her, the father who sold her, the mother who wept in silence. She thought about the value people placed on titles, gold, and names. And there, as porridge thickened, she realized true value lives in gestures, in silent choices, in sacrifices no one sees. The truth explodes that morning. The sky woke heavy as if carrying secrets in its clouds. As Adama stirred the cooking pot, surrounded by the smell of porridge, she heard voices approaching. Loud laughter, hurried steps, restless energy in the air. A strange sound shattered the village silence. Heavy wheels, horses' hooves beating the dirt road, voices that didn't belong to that simple soil. Children ran to see, men left their fields, women abandoned pots over fire, all wide-eyed, sniffing out novelty. At the village gate, a man stepped from a dusty car, wearing a light-colored suit and shoes that gleamed like silver in the sun. His face was serious, eyes scanning every corner, searching like someone hunting something precious. The man wiped sweat from his brow, opened his arms, and shouted loud enough to be heard at the river. "Dr. Medivh, I've come to take you back. You've stayed here long enough." The name echoed like thunder in Adhama's soul. Inside the clay house, she dropped the water pot she was holding, contents spilling across the floor like silent tears. Her heart pounded. Her chest felt too small for so much shock. Medivh, returning from the field with his hoe, stopped. His steps grew heavy. Breath caught in his throat. The hoe slipped from his hand, raising a dust cloud. He looked at the man at the gate, then at Adama now standing in the doorway, clutching the frame like her lifeline. The suited man ran to Medivh, gripped his shoulders, shook him with forced cheer. Doctor, everyone in the city's waiting for you. Partners, staff, board of directors. You disappeared without warning. What are you doing here among these peasants? The entire village froze. Even chickens fell silent. Women pressed their lips. Men furrowed their brows. Silence blanketed everyone like a heavy sheet. Medivh lowered his gaze, took a deep breath. When he looked up again, his eyes were bright, not with joy, but with old, aching pain. In a firm voice, he said, I came here because I wanted to be seen as a man, not as currency. I wanted someone to look at me without weighing my gold. The suited man looked around confused, nervous grin tugging at his lips. But doctor, you own land, businesses, entire cities. You have employees depending on your leadership. You're one of the richest men in the country. Adama heard every word like hammer blows to her soul. Her breath caught. The ground seemed to sway. She stepped back, clutching her scarf to her chest, legs weakening. She felt betrayed and saved simultaneously. Betrayed by his silence, saved by his care. Medivh turned toward her. Their eyes met, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken confessions. He walked slowly, each step a silent plea for forgiveness. When he stood before her, he pulled from his pocket the gold ring, the same one she'd found in the chest. He held it out with trembling hand. Yes, I own riches, but here I learned the value of silence, the value of respect. I ran away because I wanted to be loved, without my fortune being part of the decision. I wanted to be chosen for who I am, not what I have. His voice broke at the end. Adama collapsed to the ground, holding her scarf to her chest, tears releasing what her heart could no longer hold. The choice. Medivh knelt before her, took her hands. I understand if you want to leave. I lied through silence, but never in my care. Every tea, every firewood bundle, every bowl of soup was real. My love has no price, but if you choose to walk away, I will respect that. Adama wept, not just pain, but relief and gratitude. Before her knelt a man stripped of wealth, who had chosen clay to rediscover his soul. The suited man tapped his foot impatiently. Doctor, we must go. The city is waiting. Your front page news everywhere. Medivh turned, voice firm. The city can wait. Today, my future isn't decided by headlines or shareholders. It's decided by her. Still on the ground, Adama took a deep breath. She remembered every cold night, every spoon of soup, every dawn he spent holding her hand. She thought of her mother, the humiliation, the cruel laughter. She remembered the man who, though rich, carried sacks of corn, fetched herbs in the night, cared for his sick mother-in-law. Her hand tightened around his like someone holding a branch in a raging river. She said nothing, but the gesture spoke clearly. I see you, and I accept you. The next morning, Medivh sat in the yard, face still marked by the previous day's weight. Adama sat beside him in silence, holding her scarf with both hands. The suited man returned, less impatient now, understanding some decisions cannot be rushed. He placed a large suitcase on the ground. The city is ready to receive you. There's a car waiting, a mansion, staff, clean clothes, soft beds, warm food. You don't need to live here anymore. Medivh turned to Adama, eyes a silent prayer. Invitation without chains. Come with me. I want to give you the world I left behind. I want to give you comfort you never had. I want you to walk beside me, not behind. I want you to be seen as a queen, not as a burden. And my mother? She asked, voice soft like a flickering candle. She comes with us. No one will be left behind. Not her, not the village. The suited man frowned, confused. The village? What do you mean? Mediva's eyes bright with conviction. I want to help these people. I want to bring medicine, food, tools. I want to build a school, a well, a community garden. I'm not just a landowner. I am a son of this land, and no one turns their back on their roots. Adama took a deep breath, raised her head. I'll go, but I won't go alone. I'll go with my mother, with you, and I want everyone to know I leave this place a whole woman, not a coin that was traded. Mediva squeezed her hands, face breaking into a smile like sunlight after long rain. You were never a coin. You were always a root, a flower, strength. The return months passed like unexpected rains, washing everything, stripping dead leaves, leaving ground ready to bloom. Mediva and Adhama left the village on a clear morning. Aminata nestled on an improvised bench, wrapped in soft cloths. In the big city, Adhama saw the world through eyes of someone who'd always walked barefoot on earth. Lights sparkled like fallen stars. Buildings rose like mountains. Cars rushed like startled beasts. But she didn't get lost. She kept the scarf in her pocket, remembering clay, cold nights, and cruel laughter that shaped her strength. Mediva, now dressed in clean, modest clothes, began using his fortune as a tool, not a crown. He invested in machinery, dug wells, built granaries, but in his heart carried the village, a longing pulsing on his skin. Adhama stood beside him in every decision, contract, meeting. She didn't sit at tables just to decorate. She gave opinions, asked questions, noticed every detail, showing the world that even born from clay, she could read souls better than any paper. When everything was ready, they chose to return, not as royalty, not with drums or decorated horses, but in trucks filled with food, seeds, tools, boxes of medicine, clothes, and books. Though engines roared before the sun had fully risen, the village woke startled. Doors opened slowly. Eyes peeked through cracks, expecting mockery, expecting a parade. But what they saw was different. Mediva stepped down first, the old hoe slung over his shoulder, face sunburnt, feet firm on ground, the same man who once carried sacks of corn in silence. Behind him came Adhama, scarf still in her pocket, smile small but steady, gaze embracing every inch of that soil. The new beginning, Mediva called everyone to the village center, his voice now free, ringing like a drum on feast day. I've returned, not to humiliate, not to collect. I came back to repay what you taught me. I came back to show that wealth is not gold hoarded, but life shared. Adhama walked among the women, holding trembling hands, embracing those who had once laughed at her. Each embrace was silent forgiveness, each look an answer that didn't need speaking. They built a well in the village center so no one would walk miles for clean water again. They raised a small school, solid, made of firm clay, good wood, and love in every brick. They handed out seeds to restart fields, clothes for elders, toys for children. Aminata, now more fragile, was brought in a chair beneath a cashew tree. There, she watched the grandson of the village's most infamous gossip, running with a book in hand, shouting with joy. She saw her daughter smiling without fear, now called the flower that grew from clay. The mother took a deep breath, closed her eyes, whispered to herself, it was worth the wait. Every tear was worth it. Bacheri, the father who had sold his daughter into marriage, stayed behind in his doorway, an old man now, hunched and hollowed, harvesting the weight of his choices. No one told him to stay inside, but village silence pushed him back. There alone, he felt the chill of having no one to hold his hand on gray days. That afternoon, While the sun painted the sky orange and purple, Adhama went to the backyard to harvest corn. The ears shone like small promises, tough, full of life. Looking aside, she saw Medivh crouched in dirt, hands muddy, face sweaty. He looked up and smiled, a quiet smile of someone who understands everything without needing to ask. In her mind, a phrase echoed, "The greatest wealth is knowing who covered you on the coldest night." And there, among cornstalks, heart full of stories and hands full of life, Adama understood that destiny doesn't make mistakes. It just takes its time. The village that once mocked now applauded, not from fear, but respect, not from obligation, but gratitude. And there, in that forgotten corner of the world, a poor woman once sold as debt returned as her own woman, whole mistress of her fate, a root that blossomed in clay. Their return wasn't about gold, mansions, or luxury. It was about soul, about proving that when love is planted in silence, the harvest comes, and one day the whole world must bow its head and learn. Adama became known as the flower that bloomed from clay. To many it was poetry. To her, it was truth. She knew the cost of every petal, every root, every drop of water that had nourished her courage. The scarf that once hid her face became a symbol. Women began wearing scarves like hers, not to hide, but to remember that every woman carries strength within, waiting for the right moment to wake. Medivh, though he could afford finest garments, still wore simple clothes, the old hat, worn hoe, bare feet, and clay. He understood that greatest wealth doesn't wear silk. He had learned that the soul cannot accept luxuries that suffocate. And so, with dirty hands and clean heart, he became the most respected man the village had ever seen. The final scene stayed etched in hearts of those who saw it. Adama in the yard harvesting corn, sun setting, painting the sky with colors that looked like God's own brushstrokes. She paused, looked back, saw Medivh sitting on ground fixing a broken hoe, sweat on his face, hands steady, eyes focused. She took a deep breath, breathing in the scent of fresh corn, damp earth, and love that didn't need words. Then she smiled, a full smile, wide and alive, the kind only someone who has once died inside and been reborn can understand. At that moment, a phrase echoed in her chest, soft as breeze in early morning. The greatest wealth is falling asleep, knowing who covered you on the coldest night. And so the girl who was sold became a woman revered. The scorned wife became a silent queen. The forgotten daughter became pride. And the mistreated soul became a deep-rooted foundation, strong enough to hold not just a home, but an entire people. In the village, many still tell this story around fires, like a secret passed from generation to generation. They say every woman carries clay inside her, ready to become a flower, and every man carries hidden gold, ready to become soul. What remained wasn't the mansion, money, or contracts. What remained was the living lesson. True love cannot be bought, sold, or begged for. It is planted, nurtured, harvested, then shared with those hungry for something real. And so the village learned to see silence with new eyes. And Adama, the flower from clay, continued harvesting corn beside the man who once chose to live without a crown, to find love without a price. At the end of each day, when the sun disappears and the world quiets, her last prayer is always the same. May God always give me hands to plant and arms to embrace, because the greatest fortune in the world is falling asleep, knowing who covered you on the coldest night.
Wicked billionaire husband pushed wife down from a helicopter because she queefed on his cock, but she survived and did this. What happens when a billionaire's cruelty pushes his innocent wife to the brink of death? Returns stronger, determined for justice. You won't believe how it ends. Justice, strength, and unexpected twists await. Subscribe now and stay tuned for more gripping stories like this. Sarah Martinez never imagined her life would end with a helicopter door slamming shut behind her. But that's exactly what happened when her billionaire husband discovered her most embarrassing moment at 30,000 feet. What she did next will leave you speechless. Survival and the most shocking revenge you've ever heard. To reclaim everything that was stolen from her. Make sure you stay until the end because the twist will blow your mind. Sarah had always been ordinary. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, she worked double shifts at the local diner just to pay rent on her cramped studio apartment. Her dreams were simple: find someone who loved her, maybe start a family, live quietly without the constant worry about money. She never expected to catch the attention of someone like Richard Blackwood. Richard wasn't just wealthy. He was disgustingly rich, the kind of rich that bought politicians and owned entire city blocks. When he walked into Sarah's diner that rainy Tuesday morning, everything changed. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that comes from never hearing the word no. His eyes locked onto Sarah immediately. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey. "Sarah," she replied, her hands trembling slightly as she poured his coffee. "Sarah," he repeated, like he was tasting the word. Beautiful name for a beautiful woman. From that moment, Richard became obsessed with Sarah. He'd show up at the diner every day, leaving $100 tips for $20 meals. He'd send flowers to her apartment, expensive gifts that made her neighbors whisper. Sarah had never experienced anything like it. For the first time in her life, she felt special, chosen, like she mattered to someone important. When Richard proposed after just 3 months of dating, Sarah's head was spinning. The ring alone cost more than she'd made in her entire life. Everyone told her she was living a fairy tale, that she'd hit the lottery. Sarah wanted to believe it too. The wedding was everything Sarah had dreamed of and more. Designer dress, 5-star venue, guests who belonged in magazines. Richard spared no expense, and Sarah felt like a princess walking down that aisle. She thought she'd found her happily ever after. But fairy tales don't exist in the real world. The first cracks started showing during their honeymoon. Richard's charm began to feel calculated, his compliments backhanded. When Sarah gained a few pounds from all the fancy dinners, Richard's comments turned cruel. "You're letting yourself go already?" he'd sneer. "I didn't marry a slob." Sarah tried to laugh it off, but the words cut deep. She started watching everything she ate, spending hours at the gym, desperately trying to maintain the image Richard expected. Nothing was ever good enough. Things got worse when Sarah got pregnant. She was thrilled, thinking a baby would bring them closer together. Richard saw it differently. "Great, now you'll be even more disgusting," he said when she told him the news. "Try not to balloon up like a whale." Throughout her pregnancy, Richard's cruelty intensified. He'd bring other women to business dinners, flaunting his affairs in front of Sarah. He'd criticize her appearance constantly, calling her names that made her cry herself to sleep. Sarah felt trapped, isolated, with nowhere to turn. When their daughter Emma was born, Sarah hoped Richard would soften. Instead, he seemed to resent both of them. He'd disappear for days, coming home smelling like expensive perfume and lies. Sarah poured all her love into Emma, trying to shield her from Richard's coldness. "You're pathetic," Richard would tell Sarah. "No wonder I can't stand being around you." The final straw came on what was supposed to be their second wedding anniversary. Richard announced they were taking a romantic helicopter trip to his private island. Sarah was desperate to believe he still cared, that maybe they could fix their broken marriage. As they flew over the Pacific Ocean, Sarah felt a familiar rumble in her stomach. She'd been nervous about the trip, and her anxiety always affected her digestion. She tried to hold it in, but the pressure in the helicopter cabin made it impossible. The sound was small, barely audible over the helicopter's rotor blades, but Richard heard it. His face twisted with disgust and rage. "Did you just fart?" he screamed, his voice filled with venom. "You disgusting piece of trash!" "Richard, I'm sorry. I couldn't help it," Sarah pleaded, mortified. "You've embarrassed me for the last time," Richard snarled. "I'm done with you." Before Sarah could react, Richard lunged forward and grabbed her. The helicopter door slid open, and Sarah found herself staring down at the churning ocean below. "Richard, please, think about Emma. She needs her mother." "She'll be better off without you," Richard replied coldly. We both will. With that, he shoved Sarah out of the helicopter. The fall felt like it lasted forever. Sarah's scream was lost in the wind as she plummeted toward the water. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs, and she sank deep beneath the waves. For a moment, she thought this was it, that Richard had finally won. But something inside Sarah refused to give up. Maybe it was the thought of Emma growing up without her mother, or maybe it was pure spite. But Sarah fought her way to the surface. She gasped for air, treading water as the helicopter disappeared into the distance. Sarah swam for what felt like hours, her evening dress weighing her down, her lungs burning. Just when she thought she couldn't go any further, she spotted land, a small island, uninhabited but real. She dragged herself onto the rocky shore and collapsed, coughing up seawater. She was alive, but barely. The island was remote, with no signs of civilization. Sarah had to learn to survive on her own, eating whatever she could find, drinking rainwater, sleeping in caves. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The soft, pampered woman who had fallen from that helicopter was gone, replaced by someone harder, stronger, more determined. Sarah wasn't just surviving anymore. She was planning every day on that island. She thought about Richard, about Emma, about the life that had been stolen from her. She wouldn't just return from the dead. She'd return with a vengeance. After 6 months on the island, Sarah was rescued by a passing fishing boat, but she didn't go home immediately. Instead, she spent the next 2 years carefully planning her comeback. She used the survival skills she'd learned to become a wilderness guide, building a reputation and a network of contacts. She saved every penny, invested wisely, and slowly built her own fortune. More importantly, she gathered evidence. Richard thought she was dead, so he'd gotten sloppy. Sarah discovered his money laundering operations, his connections to organized crime, his history of violence against women. She compiled everything, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When Sarah finally returned to civilization, she was unrecognizable. Gone was the timid woman who'd been pushed around and humiliated. In her place stood someone confident, powerful, and absolutely ruthless. She'd learned that in this world, you either eat or get eaten, and she was done being dinner. Sarah's first move was to secure custody of Emma. Richard had told everyone that Sarah had died in a tragic accident, but Sarah had proof of what really happened. The custody battle was vicious, but Sarah had something Richard didn't expect: the truth. "Mommy," Emma whispered, when she saw Sarah for the first time in 3 years. "Daddy said you were dead." "I'm here now, baby," Sarah said, holding her daughter tight, "and I'm never leaving you again." Richard's world started crumbling fast. Sarah released the evidence of his crimes to the FBI, the IRS, and every major news outlet. His business empire collapsed overnight. His assets were frozen, his associates arrested, his reputation destroyed. But Sarah wasn't finished. She'd learned patience on that island, and she wanted Richard to suffer the way she had suffered. She systematically destroyed everything he cared about, using his own tactics against him. She bought his debts, foreclosed on his properties, turned his friends against him. The final confrontation came at Richard's bankruptcy hearing. He was a broken man, his expensive suits replaced by a cheap off-the-rack outfit, his arrogance replaced by desperation. "You destroyed me," he whispered when he saw Sarah in the courtroom. "No," Sarah replied calmly. "You destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone knew about it." Richard was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Sarah got everything: the house, the businesses, the offshore accounts. More importantly, she got Emma back, and she got her life back. Standing in the mansion that had once been her prison, Sarah looked out at the ocean where she'd almost died. She'd survived the impossible, transformed from victim to victor. Richard had tried to throw her away like garbage, but she'd returned as his judge, jury, and executioner. The scared little girl from Ohio was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who'd learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the only way to get justice is to take it yourself. Sarah Martinez had queefed on her husband's ego, and he'd tried to kill her for it. But she'd risen from the depths of the ocean like a vengeful goddess, and now Richard Blackwood was the one drowning in the consequences of his cruelty. Now, the twisted mind of Richard Blackwood believed he had erased Sarah Martinez from existence, but what he didn't know was that the ocean had other plans. As Sarah's body disappeared beneath the waves, Richard returned to his mansion, immediately crafting his lies. He told everyone that Sarah had suffered a tragic accident during their romantic getaway. The grieving widower act came naturally to him, complete with crocodile tears and staged memorial services. But while Richard played the victim, Sarah was fighting for her life on that remote island. The first weeks were pure hell. Her body was broken, her spirit shattered, but her love for Emma kept her breathing. She learned to make fire from nothing, to find fresh water in the most unlikely places, to turn poisonous plants into medicine. The island became her university, teaching her lessons no classroom ever could. What Richard didn't anticipate was Sarah's incredible transformation. Month by month, she grew stronger, smarter, more determined. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. The same hands that once trembled at his voice now built shelter from storms. The same mind that once believed his lies now calculated every move of her eventual return. During those long nights under foreign stars, Sarah made a discovery that would change everything. Hidden in the rocks near her shelter, she found something that made her blood run cold. Richard's helicopter had crashed here before, not with her, but with someone else, another woman, another wife. Sarah realized with horror that she wasn't his first victim. Among the wreckage, she found documents, photographs, evidence of Richard's true nature, bank statements showing money laundering operations, photos of him with dangerous criminals, records of other women who had mysteriously disappeared. Sarah understood then that her attempted murder wasn't a crime of passion, it was part of a pattern. Richard Blackwood was a serial killer who used marriage as his hunting ground. This revelation transformed Sarah's mission from personal survival to something much bigger. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for every woman Richard had destroyed and every woman he planned to destroy next. She carefully preserved every piece of evidence, protecting it like precious treasure. The island's isolation, which had initially seemed like a curse, became her greatest advantage. She had time to heal, time to plan, time to become someone Richard would never recognize. The broken housewife he had thrown from that helicopter was gone forever. In her place stood a warrior, forged by betrayal and tempered by justice. Sarah's rescue came through her own ingenuity. She had learned to signal passing ships using mirrors and smoke signals. When a cargo vessel finally spotted her distress signals, she was ready. But instead of immediately revealing her identity, she chose to remain dead to the world a little longer. She needed time to prepare for the war that was coming. Working with the ship's captain, who was moved by her story, Sarah arranged for discreet transport back to civilization. She didn't go home, she went to the shadows. Using the evidence she had gathered, she began building a network of allies, private investigators, journalists, law enforcement officers who had been trying to build cases against Richard for years. The irony was perfect. While Richard believed he was untouchable, Sarah was systematically dismantling his empire from the inside. She used her presumed death as the ultimate cover, allowing her to investigate without his knowledge. She discovered offshore accounts, shell companies, and a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of society. But Sarah's masterstroke wasn't just gathering evidence, it was understanding Richard's psychology. She knew his arrogance was his weakness. He believed he was too smart to be caught, too powerful to be challenged. Sarah planned to use that arrogance against him, to make him destroy himself through his own hubris. The most painful part of her investigation was learning about Emma. Richard had told their daughter that Mommy had abandoned them, that she never loved her enough to stay. Emma, now older and filled with resentment, had been poisoned against her mother's memory. Sarah watched from the shadows as her daughter grew up believing lies, and it nearly broke her heart all over again. But Sarah's love for Emma gave her strength to continue. She knew that exposing Richard's crimes would also expose his lies about her disappearance. Emma would learn the truth about her mother's love, about the sacrifice Sarah had made trying to return to her. As Sarah's network grew stronger, she began to understand the full scope of Richard's criminal empire. He wasn't just a killer, he was a kingpin who used his legitimate businesses to launder money for international crime syndicates. His victims weren't just his wives, they were anyone who threatened his operations. The evidence Sarah gathered painted a picture of a man who had built his fortune on blood and terror. She found records of bribery, extortion, and murder going back decades. Richard Blackwood wasn't just a bad husband. He was one of the most dangerous criminals in the country. But gathering evidence was only half the battle. Sarah needed to find a way to bring Richard down without putting Emma in danger. She knew that cornering a predator like Richard could make him desperate enough to hurt their daughter. Every move had to be calculated. Every strategy had to protect the innocent. Sarah's transformation was complete when she looked in the mirror and saw not a victim, but a force of nature. The woman staring back had survived the impossible and emerged stronger than ever. She had learned to trust her instincts, to fight for what she believed in, to never again allow someone else to define her worth. The island had taught her that survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about refusing to let evil win. Sarah Martinez had died in that helicopter, but the woman who emerged from the ocean was something Richard Blackwood had never encountered before. She was his reckoning, his judgment, his ultimate downfall. As Sarah prepared for her return to the world, she made a solemn promise to every woman Richard had destroyed. Their deaths would not be in vain. Their stories would be told. Their killer would finally face justice. The hunt was about to begin, and this time, Richard Blackwood was the prey. Now that Sarah had the evidence and resources she needed, the real war was about to begin. But what she discovered next would make her question everything she thought she knew about Richard's cruelty. The truth was far more twisted than even she had imagined. Sarah had spent 3 years building her case methodically, gathering evidence like a hunter setting traps. Every financial record, every witness statement, every piece of documentation that could expose Richard's crimes had been carefully cataloged and preserved. She had allies now, powerful people who believed in her cause and were willing to help bring down the monster who had destroyed so many lives. But as she prepared to launch her final assault on Richard's empire, something unexpected happened that would change everything. It started with a phone call from Detective Martinez, the lead investigator on her case. His voice was tense, urgent in a way that made Sarah's stomach clench with familiar fear. "Sarah, we need to meet. There's something you need to know about Richard. Something that changes everything we thought we understood about his crimes." She agreed to meet him at a small cafe downtown, away from prying eyes and listening ears. When Detective Martinez arrived, his face was pale, his hands shaking slightly, as he placed a thick manila folder on the table between them. "What I'm about to show you," he said quietly, "it's going to be hard to process. We've been investigating Richard for months now, following the evidence you provided, and we uncovered something that goes deeper than we ever imagined." Sarah's heart pounded as she opened the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, and what appeared to be psychological evaluations dating back decades. The first document made her blood run cold. It was a psychiatric report from when Richard was 12 years old, detailing horrific abuse he had suffered at the hands of his own father. The report described a pattern of violence so severe that it had left permanent psychological scars on the young boy who would grow up to become the monster she knew. But that was just the beginning. As Sarah read further, she discovered that Richard's father had been part of an underground network of wealthy men who engaged in unspeakable acts of violence against women and children. The network had operated for generations, passing down their twisted traditions from father to son like a cursed inheritance. Richard hadn't just stumbled into his life of crime and cruelty. He had been systematically groomed and trained for it from childhood. Detective Martinez watched her face as she processed the information. "There's more," he said softly. "We found evidence that Richard tried to escape this life when he was younger. He attempted suicide twice in his early 20s, and there are medical records showing he sought therapy to try to break free from the patterns his father had instilled in him. But every time he tried to get help, someone from the network would pull him back in." Sarah felt sick as she read about Richard's failed attempts to become a better person. There were letters he had written to therapists, desperate pleas for help in breaking free from the violent urges that had been beaten into him as a child. There were records of him donating anonymously to women's shelters, as if trying to atone for sins he hadn't yet committed. For a brief moment, Sarah felt something she never thought she would feel for Richard: pity. But then she remembered Emma, her daughter who had been taken from her. She remembered the other women whose lives Richard had destroyed, the families he had torn apart. Whatever trauma he had suffered as a child, whatever attempts he had made to change, None of that excused the choices he had made as an adult. He had become the very monster his father had trained him to be, and he had to face the consequences of that transformation. Detective Martinez continued explaining what they had discovered. The network is still active, Sarah. Richard isn't just a lone predator. He's part of something much bigger, something that has tentacles reaching into the highest levels of government, business, and society. Taking him down is just the first step. We need to expose the entire operation. Sarah felt the weight of this revelation settling on her shoulders. She had thought her fight was against one man, one monster who had destroyed her life. Now she realized she was up against something far more sinister and powerful. The network had resources, connections, and decades of experience in covering up their crimes. They wouldn't go down without a fight, and they would use every weapon at their disposal to protect themselves. But Sarah wasn't the same broken woman who had been pushed from that helicopter years ago. She was stronger now, smarter, more determined than ever. If Richard was part of a larger conspiracy, then she would expose them all. She would bring justice not just for herself and Emma, but for every victim who had suffered at the hands of these monsters. Over the following weeks, Sarah worked closely with Detective Martinez and a team of federal investigators to map out the network's operations. They discovered that the organization called themselves the Brotherhood, and they had been operating for over a century. They had members in every major city, every level of government, every industry where power and wealth concentrated. They protected each other, covered up each other's crimes, and recruited new members from among the children of the elite. The more Sarah learned about the Brotherhood, the more she understood Richard's psychology. He wasn't just a cruel husband who had snapped in a moment of rage. He was a carefully programmed weapon, designed from childhood to inflict maximum damage on those around him. His marriage to her hadn't been a coincidence. The Brotherhood had identified her as a potential victim, someone whose disappearance wouldn't be thoroughly investigated, whose family lacked the resources to fight back. But they had made a crucial mistake. They had underestimated Sarah's strength, her determination, her ability to survive and fight back. Now their entire operation was in jeopardy because of one woman who had refused to stay dead. Sarah knew that exposing the Brotherhood would be dangerous. These weren't ordinary criminals who could be taken down with standard police work. These were powerful, connected individuals who had spent generations perfecting their methods of avoiding consequences. They had judges in their pockets, politicians on their payroll, and law enforcement officials who looked the other way in exchange for money and protection. But Sarah had advantages they didn't expect. She had the element of surprise, the moral authority of a victim seeking justice, and most importantly, she had the truth on her side. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and she had allies who were willing to risk everything to help her expose these monsters. The plan they developed was complex and dangerous. They would coordinate simultaneous raids on Brotherhood properties across multiple states, arrest key members before they could destroy evidence or flee the country, and release all the evidence to the media at once to prevent any cover-up attempts. It would be the largest organized crime takedown in American history. Sarah's role would be crucial. As the star witness, the survivor who could testify to the Brotherhood's methods and Richard's crimes, she would be the face of the prosecution's case, but she would also be the primary target for retaliation. The Brotherhood would do everything in their power to silence her before she could testify. Detective Martinez arranged for Sarah to be placed in protective custody, but she refused. She had spent too many years hiding, too many years living in fear. She wouldn't spend her final battle cowering in a safe house while other people fought for justice on her behalf. She would face the Brotherhood head-on, just as she had faced Richard in that boardroom. The night before the raids were scheduled to begin, Sarah stood in her hotel room overlooking the city where her nightmare had begun. Tomorrow, she would either triumph completely or die trying. But either way, she would face her fate with dignity, strength, and the knowledge that she had fought for what was right. She thought about Emma, about the life they could have together once this was all over. She thought about the island where she had learned to be strong, about Anna and the villagers who had shown her what true kindness looked like. She thought about all the women who had suffered at the hands of the Brotherhood, all the children who had been groomed to become monsters, all the families that had been destroyed by these predators. Tomorrow, their reign of terror would end. Tomorrow, justice would finally be served, and Sarah Martinez, the woman who had survived the impossible, would be the one to deliver it. The war was about to begin, and Sarah was ready. Sarah's transformation was nothing short of extraordinary. As she lay on that hospital bed, her body broken but her spirit unshattered, she made a decision that would change everything. The old Sarah, the one who had once been meek and compliant, was gone forever. What emerged from those months of recovery was something Victor Reed had never anticipated. A woman forged by fire, tempered by betrayal, and sharpened by an unquenchable thirst for justice. The first phase of her plan was deceptively simple. Sarah needed to understand her enemy completely. Every business deal, every connection, every dirty secret that Victor had accumulated over the years. She started small, using her recovery time to quietly gather intelligence. Hospital staff, delivery workers, even the janitors became her unwitting sources of information. People talked around someone they perceived as helpless, and Sarah was an expert listener now. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Victor's cruelty wasn't random or impulsive. It was calculated, systematic, and part of something much larger than she had ever imagined. The Brotherhood wasn't just a network of wealthy men protecting each other's interests. It was a generational system of abuse, control, and elimination. Women who became inconvenient didn't just disappear. They were systematically destroyed, their reputations ruined, their children taken, their very existence erased from the world. Sarah learned about Margaret Whitmore, a senator's wife who had threatened to expose her husband's corruption. She had supposedly died in a skiing accident, but the truth was far more sinister. There was Jennifer Blackthorne, a tech entrepreneur who had discovered her partner's embezzlement. She had allegedly committed suicide, but the evidence suggested otherwise. The list went on, a horrifying catalog of women who had been silenced because they knew too much or fought back too hard. But Sarah also discovered something else, something that would become the foundation of her revenge. Every single one of these operations had been meticulously documented. The Brotherhood kept records of everything, partly for blackmail purposes and partly out of sheer arrogance. They believed themselves untouchable, so they documented their crimes like trophies. Victor, in particular, had kept detailed files on every woman he had helped destroy. Photos, recordings, financial records, even personal diaries that had been stolen from victims. The irony was delicious. Their own arrogance would become their downfall. Sarah's second phase began when she was finally discharged from the hospital. She had convinced everyone, including the doctors, that she was suffering from severe amnesia. She remembered nothing about the helicopter incident, nothing about her marriage to Richard, nothing about Emma. As far as the world knew, Sarah Martinez was a blank slate, a victim of a terrible accident who needed to rebuild her life from scratch. This gave her the perfect cover. She moved to a small apartment across town, took a job at a local diner, and began living the life of an ordinary woman with a tragic past. But beneath this facade, she was anything but ordinary. Every spare moment was spent learning, preparing, and planning. She studied business, law, technology, and most importantly, she studied people, how they thought, how they made decisions, how they could be manipulated. She also began building her network, not the kind of network that Richard had, built on power and fear, but something far more valuable. She connected with other survivors, women who had escaped abusive relationships, investigators who had seen too much corruption, journalists who had been silenced by powerful interests. These people understood injustice intimately, and they were hungry for the chance to fight back. The breakthrough came almost 2 years after her supposed death. Sarah had been working as a waitress at an upscale restaurant when she overheard a conversation between two of Richard's business associates. They were discussing a new venture, something about expanding their operations into human trafficking. The casual way they discussed destroying lives, the matter-of-fact tone they used when talking about eliminating witnesses, made Sarah's blood freeze. That night, she made a decision that would accelerate her timeline. She couldn't wait any longer. Too many women were suffering while she prepared her perfect revenge. It was time to strike back. Sarah's first target wasn't Richard himself. That would come later. Instead, she focused on David Chen, one of the Brotherhood's key financial coordinators. Chen was responsible for laundering money from their various illegal operations, and he had been present during several of the planning sessions for other women's disappearances. He was also arrogant, careless, and had a weakness for young women who reminded him of his own daughter. Sarah spent weeks studying Chen's habits, his routines, his psychological profile. She learned that he frequented a particular coffee shop every Tuesday morning, always ordering the same drink, always sitting in the same corner booth. She discovered that he had a gambling problem that he hid from his wife, and that he was deeply in debt to some very dangerous people. Most importantly, she learned that he kept backup copies of sensitive financial documents in a safety deposit box, insurance against his partners, if they ever decided to eliminate him. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Sarah approached Chen not as a victim seeking revenge, but as a potential business partner. She had created an entirely new identity, complete with a fabricated background in international finance and a reputation for discretion. She presented herself as someone who could help him solve his gambling debts while expanding the Brotherhood's money laundering operations. Chen was suspicious at first, but Sarah had done her homework. She knew details about his operations that only an insider would know, information she had painstakingly gathered over months of surveillance and investigation. She spoke his language, understood his concerns, and offered solutions to problems he didn't even know he had. The beauty of her approach was that she never asked for anything that would raise suspicions. She simply made herself indispensable, gradually gaining access to more and more sensitive information. Within 6 months, she had complete access to the Brotherhood's financial records, their communication networks, and most importantly, their plans for future operations. But Sarah wasn't content with just gathering evidence. She wanted to understand the full scope of their organization, to map out every connection, every crime, every victim. She needed to build a case so comprehensive, so overwhelming, that no amount of money or influence could make it disappear. This led her to the most dangerous phase of her plan. She began infiltrating the Brotherhood's inner circle, using her position with Chen to gain access to their private meetings and exclusive events. She attended their gatherings as Chen's associate, a quiet woman who took notes and rarely spoke. They barely noticed her, treating her as part of the furniture, which was exactly what she wanted. At these meetings, Sarah witnessed horrors that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She heard them planning the destruction of a whistleblower's family, laughing about a judge who had been blackmailed into compliance, casually discussing the elimination of a journalist who had gotten too close to the truth. She watched as they passed around photographs of their victims like trading cards, boasting about their conquests and comparing methods. And through it all, she smiled and nodded and took careful notes, documenting everything for the reckoning that was coming. The most chilling moment came when Richard himself attended one of these meetings. Sarah had been preparing for this encounter for years, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of seeing him again. He looked exactly the same, perhaps a little older, but still radiating that same casual cruelty that had made her life a living hell. He spoke about Emma with the same detached indifference he had once shown toward Sarah, referring to their daughter as an asset to be managed rather than a child to be loved. Sarah's hands trembled as she took notes, but she forced herself to remain calm. She couldn't afford to be discovered now, not when she was so close to having everything she needed. She listened as Richard discussed his plans for Emma's future, how he intended to use her as a bargaining chip in future business deals, how he would shape her into a perfect weapon for the Brotherhood's next generation. That night, Sarah made another crucial decision. She couldn't wait for the perfect moment to strike. Emma was in immediate danger, and every day that passed was another day that Richard could poison her daughter's mind, or worse, decide that she was no longer useful. It was time to accelerate the endgame. The final phase of Sarah's plan required her to reveal herself, but not in the way anyone would expect. She didn't want to simply expose the Brotherhood's crimes and hope the authorities would act. She had learned too much about corruption, about how money and power could make evidence disappear and witnesses vanish. She needed to create a situation where exposure was inevitable, where the truth would spread so quickly and so widely that no amount of influence could contain it. Sarah's masterstroke was to turn the Brotherhood's own methods against them. She had learned that they controlled several major media outlets, using them to suppress stories that threatened their interests. But she had also discovered that there were journalists within these organizations who were frustrated by the censorship, who were hungry for the chance to expose the truth. Working through intermediaries, Sarah began feeding information to these journalists, not all at once, but in carefully orchestrated waves. She started with smaller stories, corruption cases that seemed unrelated, but were actually connected to the Brotherhood's operations. As these stories gained traction, she escalated, providing more damaging evidence, more explosive revelations. The genius of her approach was that she made it seem like multiple independent investigations were all converging on the same conclusions. Journalists from different outlets, working with different sources, were all uncovering pieces of the same massive conspiracy. The Brotherhood couldn't suppress all of them without revealing their own involvement in the cover-up. As the media pressure mounted, Sarah activated the second part of her plan. She had been quietly building relationships with law enforcement officials who were outside the Brotherhood's influence, investigators who had been frustrated by cases that mysteriously disappeared, or witnesses who suddenly recanted their testimony. She provided them with evidence that was so comprehensive, so well documented, that they couldn't ignore it even if they wanted to. The breakthrough came when Sarah revealed the existence of the Brotherhood's archives, the detailed records they had kept of all their operations. She didn't just tell the authorities where to find these documents. She made sure copies were simultaneously released to journalists, posted on social media, and sent to victims' families. The information spread like wildfire, impossible to contain or suppress. But Sarah saved the best for last. She had one final revelation that would ensure Richard's complete destruction, something so damaging that even his closest allies would abandon him. She had discovered that Richard had been embezzling from the Brotherhood itself, skimming money from their operations and hiding it in offshore accounts. This wasn't just criminal, it was a betrayal of the very organization that had protected him for so long. When this information was revealed, Richard's allies turned on him instantly. The Brotherhood had rules, and stealing from your partners was an unforgivable sin. Suddenly, Richard found himself completely alone, facing not just legal consequences but the wrath of some of the most dangerous people in the world. Sarah watched it all unfold from the shadows, no longer the broken woman who had been pushed from a helicopter, but the architect of the most comprehensive takedown of a criminal organization in decades. She had done more than just get revenge. She had dismantled an entire system of abuse and corruption, freed countless victims, and ensured that justice would finally be served. But her greatest victory was yet to come. As Richard's empire crumbled around him, as his allies abandoned him, and his crimes were exposed to the world, Sarah finally stepped out of the shadows. She revealed herself not as a victim seeking revenge, but as a survivor who had become something far more powerful than her abuser had ever been. The final confrontation would be everything she had dreamed of and more. With the evidence now in her hands and her network of allies secured, Sarah knew the time had come to execute the final phase of her plan. The Brotherhood's annual gathering was approaching, a secretive event where all the most powerful members would converge at Richard's private estate. This was her moment, the culmination of years of meticulous planning and strategic positioning. Sarah had spent months preparing for this night. She had infiltrated the security company hired for the event, placing her own people in key positions. She had arranged for hidden cameras throughout the mansion, positioned to capture every damning conversation. Most importantly, she had synchronized her attack with law enforcement agencies across multiple jurisdictions, ensuring that when the hammer fell, there would be no escape routes for the Brotherhood's members. The evening arrived with an air of false celebration. Richard stood at the center of his opulent ballroom, surrounded by corrupt politicians, dirty judges, criminal financiers, and other members of the Brotherhood. They toasted their continued success, their untouchable status, their ability to operate above the law. Little did they know that their every word was being recorded, their every confession documented for posterity. Sarah moved through the crowd like a ghost, her elegant black dress and perfectly styled appearance allowing her to blend seamlessly among the elite. She had transformed herself so completely that even those who might have known her years ago failed to recognize the broken woman Richard had tried to murder. She was now a force of nature, calm and calculated, radiating the kind of quiet power that comes from absolute certainty. As the evening progressed, Sarah began to execute her masterstroke. She had planted specific pieces of information with different members of the Brotherhood, each designed to create suspicion and paranoia among the group. Whispers began to circulate about potential informants, about federal investigations, about assets being frozen. The atmosphere in the room gradually shifted from celebration to unease. Richard, ever the manipulator, attempted to maintain control of the situation. He called for silence, demanding to know who was spreading these rumors. But Sarah had anticipated this moment. She stepped forward from the crowd, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Hello, Richard," she said, her tone perfectly composed. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." The room fell silent. Richard's face went white as he stared at the woman he had tried to kill years ago. The other members of the Brotherhood looked between them, confusion and fear beginning to dawn on their faces as they realized something was terribly wrong. "Impossible," Richard whispered, his composure finally cracking. "You're dead. I watched you fall." Sarah smiled coldly. "You always underestimated me, Richard. That was your fatal flaw. You thought you could destroy me, but instead, you created your own nemesis." At that moment, the lights in the mansion flickered and went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie red glow. The sound of helicopters filled the air outside, and the distinctive voices of federal agents echoed through loudspeakers, ordering everyone to remain calm and stay where they were. Sarah had orchestrated a simultaneous raid on multiple Brotherhood properties across the country. While the elite members were trapped in Richard's mansion, their associates, their financial networks, and their criminal enterprises were being systematically dismantled by coordinated law enforcement operations. The ballroom erupted into chaos as Brotherhood members realized they were trapped. Some tried to flee, only to find their escape routes blocked by federal agents. Others attempted to destroy evidence, but Sarah had already secured copies of everything. The most brazen among them tried to assert their immunity, claiming connections to powerful politicians and judges, not realizing that many of those same officials were already in custody. Richard, desperate and cornered, made one final attempt to salvage the situation. He grabbed Sarah's arm roughly, his mask of civility completely fallen away. "You think you've won?" he snarled. "You think you can destroy everything I've built? I have resources you can't imagine. I have people in places you'll never reach." Sarah looked at him with the kind of pity reserved for the truly pathetic. "Richard, you still don't understand. I didn't just survive your attempt to kill me. I thrived. While you were busy believing your own mythology, I was systematically dismantling your empire piece by piece. Your resources, frozen, your people in high places, already in custody, your untouchable status, a delusion that died the moment you pushed me from that helicopter." The federal agents moved through the ballroom with military precision, making arrests and securing evidence. Sarah watched as one by one, the most powerful members of the Brotherhood were placed in handcuffs. Judges who had perverted justice, politicians who had sold their offices, businessmen who had built fortunes on human suffering, all of them reduced to common criminals shuffling toward police vans. But Sarah's attention remained focused on Richard. She had waited years for this moment, and she wanted to savor every second of his downfall. As the agents approached him, Richard made one last desperate plea. "Emma," he said, using her daughter's name like a weapon. "Think about what this will do to her. She'll lose everything. Her father, her inheritance, her social standing. Is your revenge worth destroying an innocent child's life?" Sarah's expression didn't change. "Emma will be fine, Richard. Unlike you, I've actually thought about her well-being. She's been placed in a loving environment, far from your toxic influence. She'll grow up knowing the truth about her father, but she'll also know that justice exists, that actions have consequences, and that even the most powerful monsters can be brought down by truth and determination." The agents reached Richard and began to read him his rights. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Sarah leaned close to him one final time. "You once told me that I was nothing without you," she whispered. "You were wrong. I was everything despite you. You tried to bury me, Richard, but you forgot that I was a seed, and now your entire world is about to be consumed by the forest I've grown." As Richard was led away, his empire crumbling around him, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. The broken woman who had washed up on that island years ago was truly gone, replaced by someone who had not only survived but had transformed that survival into something magnificent and terrible. She had become the instrument of justice that the world needed, the force that proved no one was truly untouchable. The Brotherhood was finished. Their network of corruption and abuse would be exposed in excruciating detail during the trials that would follow. Hundreds of their victims would finally see justice. The systems they had corrupted would be cleansed and reformed, and Sarah would finally be free to live the life she had always deserved, knowing that her daughter would inherit a world that was just a little bit safer because of what she had accomplished. By now, Sarah had meticulously orchestrated every aspect of her plan. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimonies were secured, and the media expose had reached fever pitch. Richard Blackwood's empire was crumbling faster than anyone could have predicted, but Sarah wasn't finished. She had one final, devastating blow to deliver. The courtroom was packed on the day of Richard's sentencing. Sarah sat in the front row, her presence commanding respect and attention. She had transformed from the broken woman who once begged for her life in that helicopter to a force of nature that even the most powerful men feared. Her eyes never left Richard as he sat at the defendant's table, his expensive suit unable to hide the defeat written across his face. The judge's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Richard Blackwood, you have been found guilty on all charges: money laundering, conspiracy, attempted murder, and numerous other crimes that have shocked this nation. Your actions have caused immeasurable harm to countless victims." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction as she watched Richard's shoulders slump. This was the moment she had fought for, bled for, survived for. But the courtroom drama was just the beginning. Sarah had uncovered something far more sinister during her investigation. The Brotherhood wasn't just a criminal organization. It was a centuries-old network that had infiltrated governments, corporations, and institutions worldwide. Richard was merely one tentacle of a massive octopus that had been strangling justice for generations. As the judge continued reading the sentence, Sarah's mind was already racing ahead to the next phase. She had compiled a comprehensive dossier on the Brotherhood's operations, their members, their methods, and their money trails. This information was already in the hands of investigative journalists across 3 continents, law enforcement agencies in 12 countries, and human rights organizations that had been fighting these shadows for decades. The ripple effects began immediately. Within hours of Richard's sentencing, arrests were made in London, Geneva, and Dubai. Corporate executives resigned in disgrace. Politicians announced early retirements. Bank accounts were frozen. The carefully constructed web of corruption that had protected these criminals for so long was finally being torn apart, thread by thread. Sarah had strategically leaked information to create maximum impact. She understood that taking down an organization like the Brotherhood required more than just evidence. It required a coordinated assault that would prevent them from regrouping. Every revelation was timed perfectly, each disclosure building upon the last, to create an unstoppable avalanche of justice. The media couldn't get enough of the story. Sarah Martinez had become a symbol of resilience and justice. Her journey from victim to victor resonated with millions of people who had felt powerless against corruption and abuse. She received thousands of letters from survivors, from whistleblowers, from ordinary people who had been inspired by her courage to speak their own truths. But Sarah's greatest victory wasn't in the headlines or the courtroom. It was in the quiet moments with Emma, her daughter who had been rescued from Richard's influence. Emma was receiving therapy, slowly healing from the psychological manipulation she had endured. Sarah had enrolled her in a prestigious school where she could rebuild her confidence and discover her own strengths. The island community that had saved Sarah's life was thriving beyond their wildest dreams. The agricultural empire she had built continued to generate massive profits, but now those profits were being used to fund schools, hospitals, and sustainable development projects across the region. Anna, the wise woman who had guided Sarah through her darkest hours, had become the director of a foundation that supported survivors of domestic violence. Sarah's story had sparked a global movement. Survivors of abuse were coming forward in unprecedented numbers, emboldened by her example. New laws were being passed to protect victims and prosecute perpetrators. The Brotherhood's influence was waning as their methods were exposed and their networks dismantled. The final chapter of Sarah's revenge was perhaps the most satisfying. She had acquired Richard's former mansion, the place where she had once lived in fear and isolation. But instead of living there herself, she had transformed it into a sanctuary for survivors of domestic violence. The marble halls that had once echoed with cruelty now rang with laughter and hope. The rooms where she had endured humiliation now housed women and children who were rebuilding their lives. As Sarah stood in the garden where she had once felt so trapped, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. The woman who had been pushed from a helicopter, left for dead in the vast ocean, had not only survived, but had emerged stronger than ever before. She had dismantled a criminal empire, rescued her daughter, and created a legacy of justice that would protect countless others. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, reminding Sarah of those peaceful evenings on the island where she had found her strength. She pulled out her phone and made a call to Anna, as she did every week. "Sarah, my dear," Anna's warm voice came through the speaker. "How are you feeling today?" "Peaceful," Sarah replied, a smile playing at her lips. "For the first time in years, I feel truly peaceful. Richard is behind bars, the Brotherhood is scattered, and Emma is healing. We did it, Anna. We actually did it." Anna's gentle laughter filled the air. "You did it, Sarah. You found the strength that was always within you. I'm so proud of the woman you've become." As Sarah ended the call, she felt a presence beside her. Emma had joined her in the garden, her face brighter than it had been in years. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said about forgiveness," Emma said softly. "I think I'm ready to start healing, really healing." Sarah wrapped her arms around her daughter, feeling the warmth of hope and love that had sustained her through the darkest times. "We'll heal together, sweetheart. We have all the time in the world." The story of Sarah Martinez had become legend, but she knew it was just the beginning. The seeds of justice she had planted would continue to grow, creating a world where no one would have to endure what she had suffered. Her transformation from victim to victor was complete, but her mission to protect others would continue for the rest of her life. The helicopter had been meant to be her ending. Instead, it had become her beginning. And in the quiet satisfaction of that realization, Sarah Martinez, survivor, advocate, and architect of hope, finally found the peace that no amount of wealth or power could ever purchase. The final truth about Sarah's transformation came not through revenge, but through the profound realization that her greatest victory lay in protecting others from the darkness she had endured. Standing in the master bedroom of what was once her prison, Sarah gazed out at the sprawling grounds where she had first arrived as Richard's naive bride. The room had been completely transformed, stripped of its cold marble and oppressive grandeur, now warm with earth tones and filled with natural light, streaming through enlarged windows. The Martinez Foundation for Survivor Support had officially opened its doors 6 months ago, and already 37 women and children had found refuge within these walls. Sarah had converted the mansion's east wing into private apartments, each equipped with everything a survivor might need to rebuild their shattered life. The west wing housed counseling centers, legal aid offices, and educational facilities where survivors could learn new skills, complete their education, or simply rediscover their own voices. Emma had flourished in this environment of healing and hope. At 16, she had become an unofficial ambassador for the foundation, her own journey from traumatized child to confident young woman serving as inspiration for newcomers. She worked part-time in the foundation's youth program, mentoring other children who had witnessed domestic violence, teaching them through her own example that survival was possible, that healing was real, and that their futures remained unwritten. The irony was not lost on Sarah that Richard's wealth, accumulated through decades of exploitation and cruelty, now funded the very cause he had fought so hard to suppress. Every dollar that once symbolized his power over the vulnerable now served to empower those he had sought to control. The Brotherhood's seized assets had been distributed among multiple survivor organizations worldwide, creating a network of support that spanned continents. Sarah's morning routine had become a meditation on transformation. She would wake at dawn, not because she had to, but because she chose to. The fear that had once jolted her awake in the middle of the night had been replaced by purpose. She would walk the grounds, checking on the organic gardens that supplied the foundation's kitchen, stopping to chat with residents who were tending to the greenhouse where they grew herbs for the on-site wellness center. The legal battles had finally concluded the previous month. Richard's appeal had been denied, his sentence upheld, and his remaining assets officially transferred to the foundation. More importantly, the international investigation into the Brotherhood had resulted in arrests across 12 countries, dismantling a network that had operated in shadows for generations. Sarah had testified via video link at several trials, her voice steady and clear as she recounted not just her own ordeal, but the systematic abuse of power that had defined the organization. Dr. Martinez, the counselor who had helped Sarah navigate her own healing journey, had become the foundation's chief psychological officer. She often reminded Sarah that true healing was not about forgetting the past, but about transforming it into something that served a greater purpose. The scars remained, but they had become symbols of survival rather than reminders of victimization. The foundation's success had attracted attention from legislators, leading to the passage of new laws, strengthening protections for domestic violence survivors. Sarah had found herself testifying before Congress, her story becoming part of a larger movement toward justice. She had never sought to become a public figure, but she embraced the role when she realized how many lives could be touched by her testimony. On this particular morning, Sarah stood in the foundation's main conference room, preparing for the arrival of a documentary crew. They were filming a piece about the transformation of abuse survivors into advocates, and Sarah had agreed to participate not for personal recognition, but to ensure that other survivors would see that their current circumstances did not define their ultimate destiny. Emma knocked softly on the door, now a young woman of remarkable poise and strength. She had inherited her mother's determination, but coupled it with a wisdom that came from having witnessed both humanity's capacity for cruelty and its potential for redemption. She would be starting college in the fall, majoring in social work with a focus on trauma recovery. "The film crew is here, Mom," Emma said, using the title that had taken months to feel natural again. "Are you ready?" Sarah smiled, adjusting the simple navy blazer she wore over a white blouse. She had long since abandoned the designer clothes that Richard had insisted upon, preferring clothing that reflected her authentic self rather than someone else's expectations. "I'm ready. Are you sure you want to participate in this?" Emma nodded firmly. "Our story isn't just ours anymore. It belongs to everyone who needs to know that escape is possible, that healing is real, and that the people who hurt us don't get to write the ending." The documentary interview lasted 3 hours, during which Sarah and Emma shared their journey from victims to survivors to advocates. The interviewer, a seasoned journalist who had covered domestic violence for decades, was visibly moved by their story. She had seen countless survivors, but rarely had she encountered someone who had transformed their trauma into such a comprehensive force for change. After the crew departed, Sarah found herself alone in the Foundation's library, a space that had once been Richard's private study. Where his law books and financial documents had once lined the shelves, there were now resources on trauma recovery, legal advocacy, and personal empowerment. The massive mahogany desk where he had planned his manipulations now served as a workspace where survivors drafted victim impact statements, wrote college applications, and planned their independent futures. As evening approached, Sarah made her way to the Foundation's communal dining room, where residents and staff gathered for dinner each night. It was a tradition she had instituted early on, believing that shared meals created the sense of family that many survivors had never experienced. Tonight, they were celebrating Maria's acceptance into nursing school, a milestone that had seemed impossible when she had arrived 8 months earlier with 2 young children and barely enough English to communicate her needs. The conversation around the table was animated, filled with plans and dreams that would have been unthinkable during the darkest days of their respective journeys. Sarah listened, occasionally offering encouragement or practical advice, but mostly just absorbing the energy of people who had reclaimed their right to hope. Later, as Sarah tucked herself into bed in her modest suite within the Foundation, she reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. The woman who had once cowered in fear of Richard's footsteps now slept peacefully in a home filled with the sounds of healing. Children's laughter echoed from the family wing, where single mothers were rebuilding their lives while their children played in spaces designed specifically for their safety and joy. The Martinez Foundation had become more than a shelter. It had become a model for comprehensive survivor support that was being replicated across the country. Sarah had never imagined that her personal hell would become the foundation for a movement that would touch thousands of lives. But perhaps that was the point. The most profound transformations often began in the darkest places, requiring nothing more than the decision to survive, to heal, and to ensure that others would not walk the same path alone. As sleep approached, Sarah's last thought was not of Richard or the Brotherhood or the years of terror that had defined her past. Instead, she thought of tomorrow's schedule, of the new residents arriving next week, of the legislation pending in 3 states that would expand protections for survivors, and of Emma's future as the advocate who would carry this work into the next generation. The helicopter had been meant to be her ending. Instead, it had become her beginning. And in the quiet satisfaction of that realization, Sarah Martinez, survivor, advocate, and architect of hope, finally found the peace that no amount of wealth or power could ever purchase.
A homeless girl returned. A billionaire's lost wallet at what he did next shocked everyone. A homeless teenager found a wallet containing $50,000 in cash and cards that could access billions. But what she did next will shatter every assumption you have about human nature. This is the story of Luna Martinez, a 17-year-old living in cardboard boxes, who made a split-second decision that exposed the darkest secret of America's elite and accidentally triggered the largest act of generosity in modern history. What the billionaire did when she returned his wallet will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about wealth, poverty, and the invisible threads that connect us all. But first, you need to understand just how desperate Luna's situation really was. The December wind cut through downtown Chicago like a serrated knife, turning every breath into visible proof of survival. Luna Martinez pressed herself deeper into the loading dock behind Millennium Tower, her entire worldly possessions crammed into a garbage bag that served as both pillow and shield against the concrete that had become her bed. At 17, Luna had the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd learned too early that the world's safety nets had holes large enough for entire human beings to fall through. Her clothes, 3 donated sweaters layered under a torn winter coat, carried the permanent smell of the streets, exhaust fumes, desperation, and the particular staleness that comes from sleeping in places never meant for human habitation. She'd been homeless for 8 months, ever since aging out of the foster system with nothing but a bus ticket and a social worker's hollow promise that things would work out. Things, as it turned out, had not worked out. The youth shelter had a 6-month limit. The job at McDonald's disappeared when she had no address for tax forms. The community college dreams evaporated when she couldn't afford the application fees. The path that led Luna to this frozen loading dock was paved with the kind of institutional failures that make headlines but rarely change lives. Her story began not with a single catastrophic event, but with a cascade of small betrayals by the very systems designed to protect vulnerable children. Luna's mother, Maria Martinez, had been a nurse at Chicago General Hospital, one of those quietly heroic people who worked double shifts to keep their small family afloat. When Maria received her cancer diagnosis, she fought with the same fierce determination she'd shown caring for her patients. But cancer doesn't negotiate with determination, and the medical bills that followed were astronomical enough to bankrupt a small nation. Luna still remembered the night her mother sat her down, tears streaming down her face to explain that they were losing their apartment. "Mija," Maria had whispered, her voice breaking. "Sometimes life hits us with waves bigger than we can handle, but you're stronger than you know. You're going to survive this storm." 3 months later, Maria was gone, and Luna was thrust into a foster care system that was already stretched beyond its breaking point. The statistics were brutal. Every year, approximately 20,000 young people aged out of foster care in America, and within 4 years, half would be homeless, pregnant, or incarcerated. Luna was determined not to become another statistic, but determination, she learned, wasn't always enough. Her first foster family, the Johnsons, seemed promising. They lived in a suburban house with a yard and spoke about giving Luna stability and opportunity. But within weeks, it became clear that their primary interest was the monthly stipend that came with housing a foster child. Luna slept on a mattress in the basement, ate different meals from the family, and was expected to provide unpaid childcare for their biological children. When she reported the conditions to her caseworker, she was moved to another home, then another. Each placement brought new disappointments, new forms of neglect or abuse, new reasons to believe that the system saw her as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be protected. The final placement was with the Hendersons, a couple who ran what Luna later realized was essentially a group home disguised as a family. They housed 6 foster children in a 3-bedroom house, collected the stipends, and provided minimal supervision or care. It was there that Luna learned the most important lesson of her adolescence. She could only depend on herself. When she aged out at 17, Luna was handed a bus ticket, a garbage bag containing her few possessions, and a pamphlet about transitional services that existed mostly on paper. She found herself in downtown Chicago with $47 in cash and no idea how to navigate the adult world that had suddenly become her reality. The first month was a crash course in urban survival. Luna learned which library bathrooms had the best soap dispensers, which restaurants might give her leftover food at closing time, and which police officers would move her along gently versus which ones would confiscate her belongings. She discovered that being a homeless teenager made her simultaneously invisible and hypervisible, ignored by most adults, but constantly watched by those who might exploit her vulnerability. She managed to get the job at McDonald's by using the address of a 24-hour laundromat and having mail sent there. For 6 weeks, she was optimistic. She was earning money, had a routine, and was slowly saving enough to afford a security deposit on a room somewhere. But when the manager needed her actual address for tax paperwork, the carefully constructed lie collapsed. Without a permanent address, she couldn't keep the job. Without the job, she couldn't afford an address. The youth shelter provided temporary relief, but their 6-month limit meant she was eventually back on the streets. The waiting lists for affordable housing were years long. The requirements for most assistance programs seemed designed to exclude people in her exact situation: too old for children's services, too young for adult programs, too poor to afford the documents required to prove her poverty. By December, Luna had developed the kind of street wisdom that comes from necessity. She knew which buildings had unlocked stairwells, which construction sites had temporary heating, and which hospital emergency rooms would let her sit for hours without asking questions. She'd learned to make herself small and quiet, to avoid eye contact with police officers, and to recognize the predatory looks of men who saw homeless teenage girls as easy targets. But no amount of street wisdom could prepare her for the Chicago winter. The cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was life-threatening. Luna had already had 2 close calls with hypothermia, and she knew that her luck was running out. The city's emergency shelters were overcrowded, with waiting lists that stretched around the block. The warming centers closed during the day, forcing people back onto the streets regardless of temperature. It was in this context, cold, hungry, and genuinely afraid she might not survive the winter, that Luna found herself pressing against the loading dock of Millennium Tower on December 23rd, counting the $3.47 in quarters and dimes that represented her entire fortune. Now, as snow began to fall like frozen tears from the Chicago sky, Luna faced the brutal mathematics of street survival. It was December 23rd, every shelter was full, and she had exactly $3.47 in quarters and dimes. Not enough for a single meal, let alone a warm place to sleep. That's when she saw it. A leather wallet, thick as a paperback novel, lying abandoned on the sidewalk outside the tower's revolving doors. It must have fallen from someone's coat as they rushed through the holiday crowds, and now it sat there like a Christmas miracle wrapped in Italian leather. Luna's heart hammered against her ribs as she approached. The wallet was the kind carried by people who never worried about where their next meal would come from. Soft burgundy leather that probably cost more than most people made in a week. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with hand-stitched seams and a subtle monogram that spoke of old-world luxury. When she opened it, the sight literally made her gasp. Cash, more cash than she'd ever seen in her life. $100 bills layered thick as autumn leaves, followed by credit cards that gleamed like platinum promises. Her hands trembling, Luna counted quickly. $50,000 in crisp hundreds, plus cards from banks she'd only seen in movies. American Express Centurion, JP Morgan Private Bank, Credit Suisse. But it was the driver's license that made her stomach drop to her toes. Marcus Blackstone, age 52, address 875, North Lakeshore Drive, Penthouse. Luna recognized that name. Everyone in Chicago did. Marcus Blackstone, the tech billionaire whose company had revolutionized renewable energy storage, whose net worth had recently crossed the $15 billion mark, according to Forbes. The man whose penthouse apartment was literally visible from where she now sat shivering. His company, Blackstone Energy Solutions, had developed the breakthrough battery technology that was transforming the electric vehicle industry and making renewable energy storage economically viable on a massive scale. Behind the license, she found something that made her hands shake even harder. A folded hospital bracelet with a child's name on it, Emma Blackstone. and a pharmacy receipt for pediatric cancer medication that cost $47,000 per dose. The receipt was from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, dated just 3 days ago, with a note scrawled in desperate handwriting. Emma's treatment must have by Dec 26th. This wasn't just money. This was someone's lifeline. Luna stared at the cash that could change her life forever. $50,000 would mean an apartment, food, safety. It would mean never again falling asleep wondering if she'd freeze before morning. It would mean becoming human again instead of just another invisible ghost haunting Chicago's streets. She could buy a car, get an apartment, enroll in college, start the life she'd been dreaming about since she was old enough to understand that some people had futures while others just had survival. The voice in her head, the survival voice that had kept her alive for 8 brutal months, screamed at her to take it. Rich people have insurance, it whispered. He probably spends more than this on lunch. You need it more than he ever will. This is your chance. This is your ticket out of hell. But another voice, quieter but somehow stronger, echoed something her mother had told her before the cancer had stolen her away. Baby, when you're tempted to take what isn't yours, remember that your character is the only thing they can never take away from you. In this world, you'll face moments where doing the right thing costs you everything. Those are the moments that define who you really are. Luna closed her eyes, the wallet heavy in her hands like a physical manifestation of moral weight. Around her, Chicago hummed with holiday preparations, families hurrying home to warmth and love, office workers celebrating end-of-year bonuses, couples shopping for engagement rings. The city pulsed with the rhythm of lives that had structure, purpose, future, and here she sat, alone with a decision that would define who she was at her core. She thought about Emma Blackstone, a child she'd never met, who might be lying in a hospital bed somewhere fighting for her life. She thought about Marcus Blackstone, a man who could buy and sell entire companies, but who apparently carried cash for his daughter's treatment the same way Luna carried quarters for her next meal. Desperately, protectively, knowing that loss meant catastrophe. She thought about her mother working double shifts at the hospital, always helping others even when her own life was falling apart. Maria Martinez had died with almost nothing to her name, but she died with her integrity intact. Character, she'd always said, is what you do when no one is watching and you have everything to lose. The irony wasn't lost on Luna. Here she was, literally having everything to lose and no one was watching. She made her choice. Standing on legs that shook from cold and hunger, Luna approached the tower's security desk. The guard, a large man whose name tag read Roberto, looked up with the expression people reserved for the homeless, a mixture of suspicion and barely concealed disgust. His eyes swept over her matted hair, her layered clothing, her obvious desperation, and his jaw tightened. "Excuse me," Luna said, her voice cracking from disuse. "I found this outside. It belongs to Marcus Blackstone." Roberto's eyebrows shot up as he examined the wallet. His demeanor shifted immediately from dismissive to shocked. "Where exactly did you find this?" "On the sidewalk by the main entrance. I think it fell out of someone's coat." The guard studied her with new interest, clearly struggling to reconcile the homeless teenager before him with someone returning a wallet full of cash. He opened it, his eyes widening at the sight of the money. "Do you know how much is in here?" $50,000, Luna said quietly. Roberto stared at her for a long moment. "You could have just kept it," he said finally. "No one would have known." "But it's not mine," Luna replied simply, "and someone needs it for something important." Roberto made a phone call, speaking in rapid, hushed tones. Luna caught fragments. "Homeless girl. Returned Blackstone's wallet. 50,000 in cash. She's right here." Within minutes, the elevator chimed, and Luna found herself face to face with a woman in an expensive suit who introduced herself as Sarah Chen, Mr. Blackstone's personal assistant. "You're the one who found Marcus's wallet?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to managing crises. Her eyes, like Roberto's, swept over Luna's appearance with a mixture of surprise and something that might have been admiration. Luna nodded, holding out the wallet like it was radioactive. Sarah opened it, quickly verifying the contents. "Everything's here," she murmured, then looked at Luna with something approaching wonder. "Roberto told me that you're homeless." Heat flooded Luna's cheeks. The word always felt like a brand, marking her as different, as failed, as less than human. "Yes, ma'am." "And you returned a wallet with $50,000 in cash." "Yes, ma'am." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying Luna's face as if trying to solve a puzzle. "How long have you been on the streets?" 8 months? "And you've been surviving on?" "Whatever I can find. Sometimes people give me change. Sometimes restaurants have leftover food." Luna's voice grew smaller with each admission. Sarah's expression softened. "When did you last eat?" Luna had to think. "Yesterday morning. Someone gave me half a sandwich." "Jesus," Sarah whispered. Then, louder, "Mr. Blackstone is upstairs. He'd like to meet you." The penthouse elevator ride felt like ascending to another planet. Luna caught her reflection in the polished steel doors and wanted to disappear. Her matted hair, her layered thrift store clothes, the smell that no amount of public restroom washing could eliminate. She was about to meet one of the world's wealthiest men, looking like exactly what she was, a homeless kid who hadn't had a real shower in weeks. The elevator climbed for what felt like forever. Numbers ticking by on the display, 20, 30, 40, 50. Luna had never been this high in a building before. Through the elevator's glass back wall, she could see the city shrinking below them, the streets where she'd learned to survive becoming a distant grid of light and shadow. When the doors finally opened, Luna stepped directly into an apartment that defied her understanding of what homes could be. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a 360-degree view of Chicago that made the city look like a jeweled circuit board. Art that belonged in museums hung on walls that probably cost more than most houses. A Christmas tree that must have been 20 feet tall dominated one corner, decorated with ornaments that looked like they were made of real gold and silver. But it was the man standing by the windows who captured her attention. Marcus Blackstone looked exactly like his photos, but somehow more human, tall and distinguished, with silver-touched hair and the kind of presence that filled rooms. He was on the phone when the elevator opened, speaking in the rapid-fire language of international business. But he ended the call the moment he saw Luna. "You must be the young woman who found my wallet," he said, approaching with his hand extended. His voice carried traces of an accent she couldn't place. Maybe European, refined, but warm. "I'm Marcus Blackstone." Luna shook his hand, acutely aware of how rough her own palm felt against his. "Yes, sir. I'm Luna Martinez. Please sit," Marcus said, gesturing to a couch that probably cost more than most cars. The leather was butter soft, and Luna sank into it with a sigh she couldn't suppress. "Can I get you something? Coffee? Hot chocolate? When did you last eat?" The kindness in his voice made Luna's throat tighten. "I'm fine, sir." "No, you're not," Marcus said gently. "Sarah, could you ask Maria to prepare something? Soup? Sandwiches, whatever she has ready." He turned back to Luna. "And while we're waiting, I'd like to hear your story." "My story?" Marcus sat across from her, his attention focused entirely on her face. "Luna, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." Her heart rate spiked. "Okay. When you found that wallet, you knew there was enough money inside to change your life. You could have disappeared, started over anywhere in the country. No one would have found you. Why did you bring it back?" Luna was quiet for a moment, thinking about her mother, about the choices that define us when no one is watching. "Because it wasn't mine," she said finally, "and because I saw the hospital bracelet. Someone needs that money for something important." Marcus's expression shifted to something Luna couldn't read. "The hospital bracelet." "Yes, sir. And the prescription receipt for cancer medication. I lost my mom to cancer. I know how expensive treatment is." Something in Marcus's face cracked open. He walked to a framed photo on his desk, the same photo Luna had glimpsed in his wallet, and picked it up with hands that trembled slightly. "This is my daughter, Emma," he said quietly. "She's 8 years old. 6 months ago, she was diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia." Luna felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in years, intellectual excitement. "What about mentorship programs, like pairing homeless youth with people who've been through similar experiences? Tell me more about that idea." "Well, most mentorship programs pair kids with successful adults who mean well, but don't really understand. They give advice like, just work hard or stay positive, without understanding the daily reality of trying to survive on the streets." Luna's voice gained strength as she spoke. "But what if we paired kids with people who had been homeless themselves? People who could say, 'I know this is hard, and here's how I got through it.'" Marcus was writing notes as fast as he could. "That's brilliant. Peer mentorship based on shared experience rather than traditional power dynamics." "And what about micro-housing?" Luna continued, ideas flowing faster now. "I've seen tiny house villages in some cities. They cost a fraction of traditional housing but give people privacy and dignity. You could create transitional communities where kids have their own space but also access to support services. Have you been thinking about these ideas for a while?" Luna paused, surprised by the question. "I guess I have. When you're living it, you can't help but think about how it could be better. You see all the ways the system fails, and you imagine what would actually help." "That's exactly what I want to harness," Marcus said. "Your insights, your ideas, your understanding of what actually works versus what sounds good in theory." Maria appeared again, this time carrying a small suitcase. "I packed some clothes for tonight," she said to Luna. "Basic things. Pajamas, toiletries, a change of clothes for tomorrow. We'll get you properly set up tomorrow." Luna stared at the suitcase, overwhelmed. "You packed clothes for me?" "Of course, Mika. You can't go to a hotel with just what you're wearing." The kindness was almost too much. Luna had grown so accustomed to being treated as a problem or a threat that simple human decency felt overwhelming. "There's something else," Marcus said. "I want you to meet Emma." Luna's heart skipped. "Really?" "She's back in Philadelphia right now, but she's coming to Chicago for Christmas. She specifically asked to meet the girl who found Daddy's wallet." Marcus smiled. "I told her about you, and she wants to thank you personally." What did you tell her? The truth. That a very brave young woman found something that belonged to us and brought it back, even though keeping it would have helped her tremendously. Marcus paused. She said she wants to be friends with you. Emma doesn't have many friends right now. The cancer treatment keeps her isolated from other kids. Luna felt tears starting again. I'd love to meet her. Good, because there's something I think you two might have in common. Emma is incredibly smart, but she's also incredibly empathetic. She worries about other kids in the hospital, asks me to donate to children's charities, wants to know how we can help people. Marcus smiled sadly. Cancer has aged her in some ways, made her think about things most 8-year-olds never consider. Like what? Like why some kids have families and others don't. Why some people have enough money for medicine and others don't. She asks very hard questions about fairness and justice. Marcus met Luna's eyes. I think she'd learn a lot from talking to you, and I think you might learn something from her too. Luna nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. There's one more thing, Marcus said, his voice growing serious. This job, this opportunity, is going to be hard work. You'll be dealing with traumatic stories, working with kids who are going through what you went through. You'll be in meetings with government officials and donors who might not immediately take you seriously because of your age or background. I understand. Do you? Because part of what I'm asking you to do is to be the public face of this issue, to share your story, to speak at conferences, to help educate people who've never experienced homelessness about what it's really like. Luna felt a flutter of anxiety. Public speaking? Only when you're ready, and only as much as you're comfortable with. But yes, eventually I'd like you to help us educate others. Your story is powerful, and it could help change how people think about homeless youth. Luna thought about all the times she'd been made to feel ashamed of her situation, all the looks of disgust and fear she'd endured. The idea of standing up and owning her story instead of hiding from it was both terrifying and exhilarating. What if people judge me? What if they think I'm just some trashy kid who got lucky? Then they'll be wrong, Marcus said firmly. And part of your job will be helping them understand why they're wrong. He paused. Luna, I've met presidents and CEOs and Nobel Prize winners. I've never met anyone who demonstrated the kind of moral courage you showed tonight. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Sarah reappeared in the penthouse. The suite is ready at the Fairmont. I've arranged for a car to take Luna there whenever she's ready. Marcus looked at Luna. Are you ready? Or do you have more questions? Luna looked around the penthouse one more time, trying to process everything that had happened. 12 hours ago, she'd been counting quarters and preparing to spend another night on the streets. Now she was being offered a job, an apartment, a future she'd never dared to imagine. I have one more question, she said. What's that? When do I sign? Marcus laughed. A warm, genuine sound that filled the room. Right now, if you want to. He produced a pen, and Luna signed her name at the bottom of the contract, with hands that shook only slightly. When she was done, Marcus signed as well, then handed her a copy. Welcome to the Blackstone Foundation, Luna Martinez, Director of Youth Advocacy and Program Development. Luna stared at the paper with her name on it, proof that this was really happening. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing, for believing. Thank you, Marcus replied, for showing me what integrity looks like, for reminding me why this work matters. As Luna prepared to leave for the hotel, Maria pressed a small bag into her hands. Leftovers, she explained, in case you get hungry later. The gesture was so maternal, so normal, that Luna almost broke down again. It had been nearly a year since anyone had worried about whether she'd eaten enough. On the elevator ride down, Sarah explained the logistics of the next few days. Tomorrow we'll get you set up with everything you need. Sunday, we'll start your orientation. Monday, you begin work. She paused. Luna, I want you to know something. I've worked for Marcus for 8 years. I've seen him make a lot of decisions, hire a lot of people. I've never seen him more certain about anything than he is about you. Really? Really. He called me 20 minutes after you left the wallet and said, Sarah, I just met the person who's going to help us change everything. The car ride to the hotel passed in a blur. Luna pressed her face to the window, watching the city she'd learned to survive in transform from a hostile environment into a place of possibility. The same streets that had been cold and dangerous just hours ago now felt different, infused with hope. The Fairmont suite was larger than any apartment Luna had ever lived in, with a king-sized bed, a sitting area, and a view of Lake Michigan. The bathroom alone was bigger than some of the foster homes she'd stayed in. Luna ran a bath, the first real bath she'd had in months, and sank into the warm water with a sigh that seemed to release 8 months of tension. She thought about her mother, about what Maria would say if she could see her now. Character is what you do when no one is watching and you have everything to lose. Luna had made her choice in that moment of absolute desperation, and somehow, impossibly, it had led her here, to this bathroom, this job, this future that stretched out before her like an uncharted continent. She thought about Emma Blackstone fighting for her life in a hospital bed and felt a surge of protective determination. She thought about all the other kids sleeping in loading docks and abandoned buildings tonight and made a silent promise to them and to herself. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. 3 months later, Luna stood in the renovated community center that had become the headquarters of the Blackstone Youth Initiative, watching a group of formerly homeless teenagers learn job skills that would change their lives forever. Her apartment, a real apartment with heat and a door that locked, was 5 blocks away. Her college courses were going well, and for the first time in her life, she had a savings account. But the moment that stayed with her wasn't any of those victories. It was the night she'd stood in the snow, holding a stranger's wallet, and chosen honesty over survival. The program had already helped 200 young people find stable housing and employment. Luna had testified before Congress about the failures of the foster care system. She'd been featured on the cover of Time magazine as one of their young leaders of tomorrow. But none of that compared to the letters she received from kids who'd found hope through the programs she'd helped design. Emma Blackstone was in remission, her cancer responding better than anyone had dared hope. She and Luna had become unlikely best friends, the 8-year-old and the 18-year-old bonding over shared experiences of loss and resilience. Emma had even helped design some of the Foundation's programs, her childlike wisdom cutting through adult complexities to find simple, powerful solutions. The night before Emma's last treatment, she'd called Luna with a request that had brought tears to both their eyes. "Luna," Emma had said, her voice small but determined, "when I'm all better, I want to help other kids like you helped me. I want to make sure no kid ever has to sleep outside in the cold." "You already are helping," Luna had replied. "Every day you're helping." The foundation had expanded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. What had started as a local Chicago initiative now operated in 37 cities across the United States and was being studied as a model by governments around the world. The key difference was that it was designed and led by people who had lived the experiences they were trying to address. Luna's office was filled with photos and letters from young people whose lives had been transformed. But her favorite was a simple note from a 17-year-old named David who had aged out of foster care in Detroit. "Dear Luna, I was sleeping in my car when I heard about your program. I thought it was too good to be true. 3 months later, I have an apartment, a job, and I'm starting college in the fall. But most importantly, I have hope again. You showed me that my story doesn't end with being homeless. It begins with what I choose to do next. Thank you for proving that integrity isn't a luxury. It's the foundation of everything worth building." That choice had saved a little girl's life. That choice had created a program that would help thousands of young people find their way out of homelessness. That choice had proven that character isn't built by circumstances. It's revealed by them. 6 months later, Luna received a wedding invitation that made her cry happy tears. Marcus Blackstone was marrying his longtime partner, Dr. Catherine Williams, the woman who had been pregnant with Emma during that fateful car accident 22 years ago. Emma, now in full remission and glowing with health, was going to be the flower girl. At the wedding, as Luna watched Emma dance with her father, she thought about the ripple effects of integrity, how one decision to do the right thing could cascade into countless lives saved, dreams restored, futures made possible. But the moment that changed everything happened during the reception, when Marcus stood to give a toast. 22 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the crowded ballroom, "A homeless veteran named James saved my family's life. I never found James. Never got to thank him properly. But 8 months ago, a homeless teenager named Luna Martinez showed me how to honor his memory." He gestured to Luna, who felt her cheeks burn as hundreds of eyes turned to her. "Luna found my wallet containing $50,000, money I desperately needed for Emma's cancer treatment. She was starving, freezing, had every reason to keep it. Instead, she brought it back because she saw a hospital bracelet and knew someone needed it more than she did." The room was completely silent now. That act of integrity didn't just save Emma's life. It sparked something bigger. The Blackstone Youth Initiative has now helped over 5,000 young people transition out of homelessness. We've changed policy in 37 cities. We've proven that when we see homeless youth as resources rather than problems, miracles happen. Marcus paused, his voice thick with emotion. "But the real miracle is what Luna taught me that night. She showed me that heroism isn't about having money or power. It's about making the right choice when everything is pushing you toward the wrong one. She showed me that character isn't built by circumstances. It's revealed by them." He raised his glass. "So tonight, I want to toast not just Catherine and Emma and our family's future, but Luna Martinez and the thousands of young people who refuse to let their circumstances define them. To James, wherever you are, and to the truth that sometimes returning what isn't yours is the only way to find what is." As the room erupted in applause, Luna felt a hand slip into hers. Emma was beside her, beaming with pride. "You know what I realized?" Emma whispered. "What's that?" "You didn't just save my life that night. You saved your own life too. You just didn't know it yet." Her mother had been right. Character was the one thing they could never take away from her. But what Luna learned that night was even more powerful. Character wasn't just something you kept. It was something you gave away, and in giving it away, you got back everything you'd ever truly needed. 1 year later, the moment that completed the circle happened on a snowy December evening. exactly 1 year after Luna had found the wallet. She was leaving the community center when she saw a homeless teenager huddled in the same loading dock where she'd once slept. Without hesitation, Luna approached the girl and said the words that had once changed her life. "There's a warm place inside and people who want to help. Will you let me show you the way?" The girl looked up with hollow eyes that Luna recognized, the look of someone who'd given up on the world caring about her survival. "Why would you help me?" the girl asked. Luna smiled, thinking of a wallet full of cash, a little girl dancing at her father's wedding, and the infinite power of choosing hope over despair. "Because someone once helped me," she said simply, "and because that's what we do." The girl's name was Sarah, and she was 16, had aged out of care early due to overcrowding, and had been on the streets for 4 months. As Luna walked her into the warm community center, she felt the profound satisfaction of a cycle completing itself. That night, as Luna helped Sarah fill out intake forms and connect with housing services, she realized something profound. Her story hadn't ended with that moment of choice in the snow. It had begun there. Every life she helped transform was another thread in a tapestry that had started with one simple decision: to do the right thing when everything was pushing her toward the wrong thing. 6 months later, Sarah would become the second director of youth advocacy at the Blackstone Foundation's Detroit branch, her own lived experience informing programs that would help hundreds more young people. The cycle continued: integrity begetting integrity, hope creating hope, character revealing itself in the most desperate moments, and transforming not just individual lives but entire communities. Sometimes the smallest acts of honesty create the largest waves of change, and sometimes returning what isn't yours is the only way to find what is. In the end, Luna's mother had been right about character being the one thing that could never be taken away. But what Maria Martinez couldn't have known, what no one could have predicted, was that giving away your character when it costs you everything is how you discover that you never truly lose it. You just invest it in a future bigger than you ever dared to imagine. The end. Like the air had been sucked from the room. That medication you saw on the receipt, it's experimental, not covered by insurance. It costs $47,000 per dose, and she needs it every 2 weeks. Marcus's voice grew thick. That wallet contained exactly enough cash for her next treatment, plus a little extra for whatever might come next. "Oh my God," Luna whispered. "The treatment has to be paid for in cash, in advance. The pharmaceutical company doesn't accept insurance or payment plans for experimental drugs. If you had kept that money, my daughter might have—" Marcus stopped, unable to finish the sentence. He set the photo down and looked at Luna with eyes bright with unshed tears. "You didn't just return a wallet, Luna. You may have saved my daughter's life." The weight of what she'd almost done, what she could have stolen without knowing, hit Luna like a physical blow. "I didn't know," she gasped. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know how important." "Don't apologize," Marcus said firmly. "You made the right choice without knowing the consequences. That's the definition of true character." He paused, studying her face. "Tell me about your mother." Luna's throat constricted. Nobody ever asked about her mother anymore. She was a nurse at Chicago General. She used to say that healing people was her calling, that she couldn't imagine doing anything else. The words came slowly at first, then faster. When she got sick, she kept working as long as she could. Even when the chemo made her so tired she could barely stand, she'd drag herself to the hospital because she said her patients needed her. "What kind of cancer?" "Pancreatic, stage 4 by the time they found it." Luna's voice dropped to a whisper. "The doctor said she had maybe 6 months. She made it 11. She was the strongest person I ever knew." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "She sounds like an extraordinary woman." She was. "She always told me that our circumstances don't define us. Our choices do. She said that even when everything is falling apart, we still get to choose who we want to be." Luna wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I think about that a lot when things get really bad. And that's why you returned to the wallet, I guess. I kept thinking about what my mom would do, and I knew she'd never be able to live with herself if she took money that belonged to someone else, especially money for a sick child." At that moment, a woman in her 50s appeared, carrying a tray laden with food. She was small and compact, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Luna, this is Maria Gonzalez, who keeps this household running," Marcus said. "Maria, this is the young woman I told you about." Maria set the tray down and took Luna's hands in hers. "Mija," she said softly, "when Mr. Marcus told me what you did, I started crying. You are a very special girl." The tray contained more food than Luna had seen in months. Homemade chicken soup that smelled like heaven, thick sandwiches cut into triangles, fresh fruit, cookies that were still warm from the oven. Luna's stomach growled so loudly that everyone could hear it. "Please eat," Marcus said. "We can talk while you have something." Luna picked up the soup spoon with shaking hands. The first sip was like a religious experience, rich, warm, seasoned with love and care. She had to force herself to eat slowly, to not wolf down everything on the tray like the starving person she was. Luna, Marcus said gently, I want to understand your situation better. You said you aged out of foster care 8 months ago? Luna nodded, swallowing a bite of sandwich. On my 18th birthday. Well, technically 3 days after, but close enough. And since then, you've been on the streets? Mostly, I was in a youth shelter for a while, but they have time limits. I had a job for a few weeks, but she explained about the address requirements, the impossible catch-22 of needing a home to get work, and needing work to get a home. Marcus listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Luna found herself telling him things she'd never told anyone, about the foster families who'd treated her like free labor, about the social workers who saw her as just another case file, about the nights when she'd been so cold and scared that she'd considered doing things she'd never imagined just to survive. The hardest part, she said finally, isn't the cold or the hunger. It's being invisible. People look right through you like you don't exist. Or worse, they look at you like you're something dirty that needs to be swept away. But you exist, Marcus said quietly. You matter. What you did tonight proves that. Luna felt tears threatening again. Sometimes I wonder if this is just my life now. If I'm going to be one of those people you see on the streets for years, just existing. No, Marcus said with quiet certainty. That's not going to happen. Not to you. He moved to his desk and pulled out a folder. Luna, I want to tell you something. For the past 2 years, my company has been developing a program for young people aging out of foster care. We've been researching the problem, consulting with experts, designing services, but we've been missing something crucial, the voice of someone who's actually lived through it. He slid the folder across to her. I'd like to offer you a position with our foundation, Director of Youth Advocacy and Program Development. Your job would be to help us design and implement programs that actually work, because you'd know what these kids really need. Luna opened the folder with trembling hands. The first page showed a salary figure that made her gasp. $75,000 per year, more money than she'd dreamed of earning in her entire life. But I don't have any experience, she whispered. I don't have a college degree or qualifications, or you have something more valuable than all of that. Marcus interrupted. You have lived experience, moral courage, and the empathy that comes from real suffering. You understand these kids in a way that no consultant or social worker ever could. He leaned forward, his expression intense. Luna, I don't need another expert who can write reports about youth homelessness. I need someone who can look at scared kids and show them that integrity isn't a luxury. It's the foundation of everything worth building. I need someone who can prove that character matters more than circumstances. Luna stared at the papers through her tears. The package included not just the salary, but health insurance, a housing allowance, and a full college scholarship fund. I don't understand. Why are you doing this? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then walked to another framed photo on his desk. This one showed a much younger Marcus with a beautiful woman and a toddler. 22 years ago, he said quietly, my wife Catherine was pregnant with Emma. We were driving to a dinner party when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit us. Our car flipped 3 times and caught fire. Luna held her breath. I was unconscious. Catherine was trapped. The fire was spreading and she couldn't get out. Marcus's voice grew thick. A homeless veteran named James pulled us both from the wreckage and stayed with us until the ambulance came. He saved all 3 of our lives. Mine, Catherine's, and Emma's. What happened to him? That's just it. By the time I was released from the hospital, he'd disappeared. I hired private investigators, offered rewards, spent years trying to find him, but he'd vanished into the same invisible world you've been living in. Marcus paused, his voice breaking slightly. James saved my family, and I never got to properly thank him. I never got to help him the way he helped us. Luna felt the pieces clicking together. And tonight you showed me what James might have been like. You showed me that heroism isn't about having money or power or status. It's about making the right choice when everything is pushing you toward the wrong one. Marcus met her eyes. I can't repay James for what he did, but I can honor his memory by helping you, by creating something that ensures no other kid has to choose between survival and integrity the way you did tonight. Luna wiped her eyes with the napkin Maria had provided. What would I actually do? Day to day. First, you'd work with our team to design housing programs that actually meet young people where they are. Most transitional housing programs fail because they're designed by people who've never been homeless. They have rules and requirements that sound reasonable in a conference room, but are impossible in real life. Marcus began pacing, his energy building as he spoke. You'd help us create job training programs that don't just teach skills, but teach them to kids who might not have reliable transportation, or professional clothes, or stable housing. You'd work with colleges to develop pathways for students who don't fit the traditional mold. But most importantly, he continued, you'd be the voice in the room when we're making decisions. When someone proposes a policy that sounds good but won't work in practice, you'd be there to say, wait, here's what this actually looks like for a kid sleeping in a car. Luna felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Real, tangible hope for a future that extended beyond just surviving the next day. There's something else, Marcus said. Emma is in treatment at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. It's one of the best pediatric cancer centers in the world, but it means I travel back and forth constantly. I'd want you to come with me sometimes to visit other cities, see how different places handle youth homelessness. You want me to travel? Like, on airplanes? Marcus smiled. Private jet, actually. One of the few perks of this level of wealth. His expression grew serious again. Luna, I want you to see that there's a whole world out there beyond survival. I want you to meet other young people who've overcome impossible circumstances. I want you to understand that your story doesn't end with homelessness. It begins with what you choose to do next. Luna looked around the penthouse, at the art and the view and the Christmas tree that probably cost more than most people's cars, and tried to imagine herself belonging in this world. It seemed impossible, like trying to picture herself on the moon. I'm scared, she admitted. What if I'm not smart enough? What if I mess up? What if people find out I don't really belong here? Belong here? Marcus sat back down across from her. Luna, you just demonstrated more moral courage than most people show in their entire lives. You're exactly the kind of person who belongs here. He paused. And as for being smart enough, did you know that some of the most successful people I know never finished high school? Intelligence isn't about degrees or test scores. It's about curiosity, empathy, and the ability to learn. You have all of that in abundance. Maria had quietly returned and was refilling Luna's cup with hot chocolate. Mr. Marcus is right, she said softly. I have worked for many wealthy families. Most of them are good people, but they live in bubbles. They don't understand how the world works for people like us. You would help them see. And the college part? Luna asked. I barely finished high school. I had to keep switching schools because of foster placements. We'll start slowly, Marcus said. Night classes, online courses, whatever works with your schedule. The foundation will pay for everything, and you can take as long as you need. Education isn't a race. Luna felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. Can I ask, why me specifically? I mean, there are other homeless kids who probably deserve this more. Deserve? Marcus shook his head. Luna, this isn't about deserving. This is about recognizing that you've already proven who you are. Tonight, when you were cold and hungry and desperate, you chose honesty over personal gain. You chose to protect a child you'd never met over saving yourself. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Do you know what most people would have done with that wallet? Kept it, Luna said quietly. Exactly. Not because they're bad people, but because survival is a powerful motivator. What you did tonight is extraordinary, and it tells me everything I need to know about your character. Marcus turned back to her. But there's something else. Earlier you said the hardest part of being homeless is being invisible. I want to change that. I want to create programs that see homeless young people as resources rather than problems. I want to build something that recognizes that you don't need to be saved. You need to be supported in saving yourselves. Luna felt tears starting again. This is really real? This isn't some kind of test or dream? It's real, Marcus said gently. But I need you to know that this isn't charity. This is a job offer. I'm not offering to help you out of pity. I'm offering you this position because I believe you're the right person for it, because my foundation needs what you have to offer. Luna stared at the contract, the numbers and words blurring through her tears. What happens next? I mean, if I say yes? First, we get you set up with temporary housing. There's a corporate apartment downtown that we use for visiting executives. You can stay there while we find you something permanent. Marcus pulled out his phone. Sarah, could you call the Fairmont and book the executive suite for indefinitely? Yes, I know it's expensive. Yes, I'm sure. He hung up and smiled at Luna's shocked expression. Tomorrow, we'll take you shopping for professional clothes, get you a phone, open bank accounts. Monday, you start work. We'll begin slowly. Meetings with our program coordinators, visits to existing youth services, research. You'll basically be doing a paid internship in your own expertise. My own expertise? Luna repeated, testing how the words felt. Exactly. You're the expert on what it's like to be a teenager with no safety net. That's incredibly valuable knowledge. Marcus sat back down. Luna, I want to tell you about something I learned from James, the man who saved my family. What did you learn? James could have just called 911 and left. The fire department would have eventually gotten to us. But he didn't. He stayed. He held Catherine's hand while she was trapped, told her jokes to keep her calm, promised her that everything would be okay. Even after the ambulance came, he stayed until he knew we were safe. Marcus's voice grew soft. Later, the paramedics told me that James had burns on his hands and arms from pulling us out of the car. He never mentioned it, never complained. He just cared for strangers because it was the right thing to do. He sounds like an incredible person. He was. And that's what I see in you. You didn't just return the wallet. You could have mailed it or dropped it at a police station. But you brought it back personally because you were worried about Emma, about whether she'd get her medication in time. Luna thought about that moment in the snow, the weight of the wallet in her hands, the image of a sick child that had driven her decision. I kept thinking about how scared her parents must be. Exactly. Empathy in action. That's what James showed us, and that's what you showed me tonight. Marcus leaned forward. I want to tell you something else. This foundation we're creating, it's not going to be just another charity that throws money at problems. It's going to be different because you're going to help design it. How? We're going to start by listening, really listening, not just to service providers and government officials, but to the young people themselves. You're going to help us conduct interviews, focus groups, surveys. We're going to find out what kids actually need, not what we think they need. Marcus pulled out another folder. I've been researching this issue for 2 years, and the statistics are heartbreaking. Did you know that 40% of homeless youth have been in foster care? That LGBTQ+ youth make up 40% of the homeless youth population, despite being only 7% of the general youth population? Luna nodded. I know kids from both groups. The system isn't set up for anyone who doesn't fit a narrow definition of normal. Exactly. And most programs fail because they're designed by people who've never experienced homelessness. They create rules that sound reasonable but are impossible to follow if you're actually living on the streets. Like requiring a permanent address to get services, Luna said bitterly, or having meetings during business hours when you're trying to work, or mandatory counseling sessions that assume your homelessness is caused by personal problems instead of systemic failures. Yes, see, this is exactly what I mean. You understand the practical realities in a way that no amount of research can teach. Marcus's excitement was palpable. I want you to help us design programs that actually work, housing that doesn't come with impossible requirements, job training that recognizes that homeless youth might not have professional clothes or reliable transportation, education programs that work around the chaos of unstable housing. Luna felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in years, intellectual excitement. What about mentorship programs, like pairing homeless youth with people who've been through similar experiences? Tell me more about that idea. Well, most mentorship programs pair kids with successful adults who mean well but don't really understand. They give advice like just work hard or stay positive without understanding the daily reality of trying to survive on the streets. Luna's voice gained strength as she spoke. But what if we paired kids with people who had been homeless themselves? People who could say, I know this is hard, and here's how I got through it. Marcus was writing notes as fast as he could. That's brilliant. Peer mentorship based on shared experience rather than traditional power dynamics. And what about microhousing? Luna continued. Ideas flowing faster now. I've seen tiny house villages in some cities. They cost a fraction of traditional housing, but give people privacy and dignity. You could create transitional communities where kids have their own space, but also access to support services. Have you been thinking about these ideas for a while? Luna paused, surprised by the question. I guess I have. When you're living it, you can't help but think about how it could be better. You see all the ways the system fails, and you imagine what would actually help. That's exactly what I want to harness, Marcus said. Your insights, your ideas, your understanding of what actually works versus what sounds good in theory. Maria appeared again, this time carrying a small suitcase. I packed some clothes for tonight, she said to Luna. Basic things. Pajamas, toiletries, a change of clothes for tomorrow. We'll get you properly set up tomorrow. Luna stared at the suitcase, overwhelmed. You packed clothes for me? Of course, Mija. You can't go to a hotel with just what you're wearing. The kindness was almost too much. Luna had grown so accustomed to being treated as a problem or a threat that simple human decency felt overwhelming. There's something else, Marcus said. I want you to meet Emma. Luna's heart skipped. Really? She's back in Philadelphia right now, but she's coming to Chicago for Christmas. She specifically asked to meet the girl who found Daddy's wallet. Marcus smiled. I told her about you and she wants to thank you personally. What did you tell her? The truth, that a very brave young woman found something that belonged to us and brought it back, even though keeping it would have helped her tremendously. Marcus paused. She said she wants to be friends with you. Emma doesn't have many friends right now. The cancer treatment keeps her isolated from other kids. Luna felt tears starting again. I'd love to meet her. Good, because there's something I think you two might have in common. Emma is incredibly smart, but she's also incredibly empathetic. She worries about other kids in the hospital, asks me to donate to children's charities, wants to know how we can help people. Marcus smiled sadly. Cancer has aged her in some ways, made her think about things most 8-year-olds never consider. Like what? Like why some kids have families and others don't. Why some people have enough money for medicine and others don't. She asked very hard questions about fairness and justice. Marcus met Luna's eyes. I think she'd learn a lot from talking to you, and I think you might learn something from her too. Luna nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. There's one more thing, Marcus said, his voice growing serious. This job, this opportunity, it's going to be hard work. You'll be dealing with traumatic stories, working with kids who are going through what you went through. You'll be in meetings with government officials and donors who might not immediately take you seriously because of your age or background. I understand. Do you? Because part of what I'm asking you to do is to be the public face of this issue, to share your story, to speak at conferences, to help educate people who've never experienced homelessness about what it's really like. Luna felt a flutter of anxiety. Public speaking? Only when you're ready, and only as much as you're comfortable with. But yes, eventually, I'd like you to help us educate others. Your story is powerful, and it could help change how people think about homeless youth. Luna thought about all the times she'd been made to feel ashamed of her situation, all the looks of disgust and fear she'd endured. The idea of standing up and owning her story instead of hiding from it was both terrifying and exhilarating. What if people judge me? What if they think I'm just some trashy kid who got lucky? Then they'll be wrong, Marcus said firmly. And part of your job will be helping them understand why they're wrong. He paused. Luna, I've met presidents and CEOs and Nobel Prize winners. I've never met anyone who demonstrated the kind of moral courage you showed tonight. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Sarah reappeared in the penthouse. The suite is ready at the Fairmont. I've arranged for a car to take Luna there whenever she's ready. Marcus looked at Luna. Are you ready, or do you have more questions? Luna looked around the penthouse one more time, trying to process everything that had happened. 12 hours ago, she'd been counting quarters and preparing to spend another night on the streets. Now she was being offered a job, an apartment, a future she'd never dared to imagine. I have one more question, she said. What's that? When do I sign? Marcus laughed, a warm, genuine sound that filled the room. Right now, if you want to. He produced a pen, and Luna signed her name at the bottom of the contract, with hands that shook only slightly. When she was done, Marcus signed as well, then handed her a copy. Welcome to the Blackstone Foundation, Luna Martinez, Director of Youth Advocacy and Program Development. Luna stared at the paper with her name on it, proof that this was really happening. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing it, for believing. Thank you, Marcus replied, for showing me what integrity looks like, for reminding me why this work matters. As Luna prepared to leave for the hotel, Maria pressed a small bag into her hands. Leftovers, she explained, in case you get hungry later. The gesture was so maternal, so normal, that Luna almost broke down again. It had been nearly a year since anyone had worried about whether she'd eaten enough. On the elevator ride down, Sarah explained the logistics of the next few days. Tomorrow, we'll get you set up with everything you need. Sunday, we'll start your orientation. Monday, you begin work. She paused. Luna, I want you to know something. I've worked for Marcus for 8 years. I've seen him make a lot of decisions, hire a lot of people. I've never seen him more certain about anything than he is about you. Really? Really. He called me 20 minutes after you left the wallet and said, Sarah, I just met the person who's going to help us change everything. The car ride to the hotel passed in a blur. Luna pressed her face to the window, watching the city she'd learned to survive and transform from a hostile environment into a place of possibility. The same streets that had been cold and dangerous just hours ago now felt different, infused with hope. The Fairmont suite was larger than any apartment Luna had ever lived in, with a king-sized bed, a sitting area, and a view of Lake Michigan. The bathroom alone was bigger than some of the foster homes she'd stayed in. Luna ran a bath, the first real bath she'd had in months, and sank into the warm water with a sigh that seemed to release 8 months of tension. She thought about her mother, about what Maria would say if she could see her now. Character is what you do when no one is watching, and you have everything to lose. Luna had made her choice in that moment of absolute desperation, and somehow, impossibly, it had led her here, to this bathroom, this job, this future that stretched out before her like an uncharted continent. She thought about Emma Blackstone fighting for her life in a hospital bed and felt a surge of protective determination. She thought about all the other kids sleeping in loading docks and abandoned buildings tonight and made a silent promise to them and to herself. Tomorrow the real work would begin, and distinguished, with silver-touched hair and the kind of presence that filled rooms. He was on the phone when the elevator opened, speaking in the rapid-fire language of international business, but he ended the call the moment he saw Luna. You must be the young woman who found my wallet, he said, approaching with his hand extended. His voice carried traces of an accent she couldn't place, maybe European, refined, but warm. I'm Marcus Blackstone. Luna shook his hand, acutely aware of how rough her own palm felt against his. Yes, sir. I'm Luna Martinez. Please sit, Marcus said, gesturing to a couch that probably cost more than most cars. The leather was butter soft, and Luna sank into it with a sigh she couldn't suppress. Can I get you something? Coffee? Hot chocolate? When did you last eat? The kindness in his voice made Luna's throat tighten. I'm fine, sir. No, you're not, Marcus said gently. Sarah, could you ask Maria to prepare something? Soup? Sandwiches? Whatever she has ready. He turned back to Luna. And while we're waiting, I'd like to hear your story. My story? Marcus sat across from her, his attention focused entirely on her face. Luna, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Her heart rate spiked. Okay. When you found that wallet, you knew there was enough money inside to change your life. You could have disappeared, started over anywhere in the country. No one would have found you. Why did you bring it back? Luna was quiet for a moment, thinking about her mother, about the choices that define us when no one is watching. Because it wasn't mine, she said finally. And because I saw the hospital bracelet. Someone needs that money for something important. Marcus's expression shifted to something Luna couldn't read. The hospital bracelet. Yes, sir. And the prescription receipt for cancer medication. I lost my mom to cancer. I know how expensive treatment is. Something in Marcus's face cracked open. He walked to a framed photo on his desk, the same photo Luna had glimpsed in his wallet, and picked it up with hands that trembled slightly. "This is my daughter, Emma," he said quietly. "She's 8 years old. 6 months ago, she was diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia." Luna felt like the air had been sucked from the room. "That medication you saw on the receipt, it's experimental, not covered by insurance. It costs $47,000 per dose, and she needs it every 2 weeks." Marcus's voice grew thick. That wallet contained exactly enough cash for her next treatment, plus a little extra for whatever might come next. "Oh my God," Luna whispered. "The treatment has to be paid for in cash, in advance. The pharmaceutical company doesn't accept insurance or payment plans for experimental drugs. If you had kept that money, my daughter might have—" Marcus stopped, unable to finish the sentence. He set the photo down and looked at Luna with eyes bright with unshed tears. "You didn't just return a wallet, Luna. You may have saved my daughter's life. At that moment, I need to check my word count to ensure I'm on track for 9,000 words.